spend however you like, along with £500 in shopping vouchers for your favourite store, a games console, a pizza oven and a portable Sonos smart speaker. And the best news? You could be our next big winner, just like Phil.
Whoever wins it next is going to be as happy as I was, and they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
For your chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text prize to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Thursday, the 7th of March.
Yes, immigration is not cost-free, according to damning analysis by the OBR, as the Quango revises up its net migration estimate to 315,000 people each year. Can our public services cope?
The NHS is set to receive another £6 billion boost to its coffers in a bid to drive productivity. But with record waiting lists and relatively poor outcomes internationally, is it time we turn off this service's life support machine?
And Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling has hit back after trans journalist India Willoughby accused her of committing a crime by misgendering her publicly. Willoughby says she's reported Rowling to the police. Yes, so it all kicked off on social media between J.K. Rowling and India Willoughby overnight. Very heated exchange of words. And now what you've got is India Willoughby, the trans newsreader, saying that she's reported J.K. Rowling to the police for being rude about trans people and, crucially, for misgendering her, for calling her a him.
Don't the police have enough to be getting on with?
Well, this is the sort of crime that police get involved with.
I think it's very rude to call trans women he.
Well, India has done it in the past, I believe.
I think not defend... I know India Willoughby has said some really nasty things before as well, but I just don't see how anyone helps anything by being unnecessarily argumentative and rude. But frankly, I don't think...
You're never unnecessarily argumentative, are you, Tom?
Never unnecessarily.
Never unnecessarily.
Whenever I'm argumentative, it's
sure.
entirely necessary. But the whole point is, people are rude to each other every day online.
Yes.
Should being rude to someone online be a criminal offence? I don't think so.
Well, Rowling said that India Willoughby, the trans journalist, is just a man revelling in his misogynistic performance of what he thinks woman means. Narcissistic, shallow and exhibitionist. Then Willoughby hit back and accused her of outrageous, well, grotesque transphobia before adding that she's every bit as much a woman as J.K. Rowling is. So I guess the question for you is, should misgendering someone ever be a crime? And is this absolutely absurd? Well, that's my opinion anyway. Absolutely absurd. GBViews at gbnews.com. Let us know. We'll be talking about this later on in the show with an expert who's gone through something similar. But first, your headlines.
Emily, thank you. The top stories from the GB Newsroom. Labour says the government must explain how it will fund a cut to national insurance announced in yesterday's budget. Around £10 billion has been spent on a 2p cut to the insurance rate, but its benefits are likely to be cancelled out by an expected rise in council tax. The Prime Minister has today repeated his long-term ambition to abolish national insurance in the next Parliament. The non-dom tax status has also been scrapped, meaning that wealthy foreign residents will no longer get a tax break. Sir Keir Starmer says the government is stealing Labour's policies.
How humiliating was that for the government yesterday? We've argued for years that they should get rid of the non-dom tax status. They've resisted that, and now, completely out of ideas, only decent policy they got is the one that they've lifted from us. And I think if you needed evidence of why we should go straight to a general election, it's that. We need change. Obviously, we will keep our commitment to the NHS, so important it is. We'll go through all of the numbers and we'll be absolutely clear. Nothing in our manifesto will be unfunded and uncosted. That is an iron rule for the Labour Party.
Forecasters are predicting household disposable income to fall by 0.9%. That would make this Parliament the first in modern history to see a drop in living standards. We asked residents in Nottingham for their reaction to yesterday's budget.
I don't make a lot of a budget, to be fair. I think it's a scummy attempt by the Conservative Party to try and regain any bit of ground that they can get, really. I think they know they're in a difficult situation and it's not going to pan out well for them.
We need to see results on the NHS, seeing a GP, things that really matter, not beer duty.
There's nothing for the ordinary working man. Conservatives and Labour, they're both the same. There's no difference. We need a change.
To other news, a woman who went on the run with her partner and newborn child has denied harming her baby. Constance Martin, who's 36 and comes from a wealthy aristocratic family, is on trial with her partner, 49-year-old Mark Gordon. Their newborn baby, Victoria, died while they were hiding from police in a tent in the South Downs in Sussex in wintry conditions last year. They allegedly went on the run in an attempt to keep the infant after 4 other children were taken into care. Speaking today in court, Ms Martin denied harming the child, insisting she'd given her the best that any mother would. Both defendants deny wrongdoing. The case is continuing. A missile attack killed 3 sailors on a Red Sea merchant ship yesterday, the first fatality since the Houthis began targeting commercial shipping. The rebel group, who are backed by Iran, claimed responsibility. The Foreign Secretary, Lord Cameron, says he's appalled by the deaths of the sailors, calling it a reckless and indiscriminate attack. Britain and the United States are continuing retaliatory strikes against the Houthis. A woman who loaded a gun on a film set that was fired by actor Alec Baldwin has been convicted of involuntary manslaughter. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed was found guilty of causing the death of 42-year-old cinematographer Helena Hutchins. She was killed when Mr Baldwin fired a gun as part of the making of a film in October 2021. Prosecutors allege that Gutierrez-Reed unknowingly brought live ammunition onto the set, disregarding gun safety protocols. She now faces up to 18 months in prison. Mr Baldwin's also due to stand trial in July. Nationwide building societies reached an agreement to buy Virgin Money in a deal worth £2.9 billion. The planned takeover would create a combined lender worth more than £366 billion. It would eventually see Virgin Money brand disappear, though Nationwide says it has no plans to cut jobs in the near term. A new train service between London and central Scotland has been given the go-ahead. The rail regulator approved plans to operate 4 daily return services between London and Euston and the city of Stirling. It'll create new competition for LNER, which currently operates services on that route. Grand Union Trains is due to launch its new services by June next year. And last month was the world's warmest February in modern times, in another sign that the world is running out of time to deal with the climate crisis. Each month since June last year has seen new temperature highs, with temperatures in Europe 3.3 degrees above the average throughout the 1990s. It means the world is, at least temporarily, now above the 1.5 degree threshold, beyond which the worst impacts of climate change are expected. For the latest news, you can sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen, or you can go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Migration will fall to 550,000 this year, down from its record high of last year. But crucially, this is up on what previous estimates of it would be this year.
Yes, Jeremy Hunt, he mentioned migration throughout his budget, at least 3 times, insisting we need to wean ourselves off cheap labour.
But the OBR shows that's not going to happen anytime soon, and they've acknowledged that not all migration is economically beneficial.
Yes, very interesting indeed. So let's explore what was said and, crucially, what wasn't said in yesterday's budget announcement.
Joining us is GB News political correspondent Olivia Utley and our economics and business editor Liam Halligan. Olivia, let's start with you. It's really fascinating that the OBR for the first time have acknowledged that migration isn't always an economic boon. There's different types.
Well, absolutely. I thought that was very interesting indeed. In previous budgets, Conservative MPs have consistently criticised the OBR for overestimating the economic benefits of migration. I think it was in the last budget that one think tank said that the OBR had overestimated the economic benefits of migration by up to £8 billion because they'd refused to accept, they hadn't built into their workings the fact that foreign students can only work for a certain number of hours. So the economic benefits they described just wouldn't have been legally possible at all. The OBR chief also admitted last time round that the OBR's profile of economic benefits of migration assumed that all migrants have a similar demographic profile to UK natal citizens. Obviously, that's not the case. We know that there are some groups of migrants who are far more economically active than the average Brit, but there are also groups of economic migrants who aren't more active than the average Brit. So this is a big change from the OBR in their way of forecasting, and you could see it trickling down into what Jeremy Hunt was saying. It was the first time, actually, that I'd heard a politician acknowledge the very obvious and simple fact that, yes, migration might increase GDP, Britain's GDP overall, but obviously, if you're making the cake bigger, as it were, if you're making the country, if you're making the population bigger, then even if the economy is getting bigger, people might still be feeling poorer. It's like making a cake bigger and giving people smaller slices of it. So this is a fascinating shift from the OBR and might be quite helpful to Conservative governments in the future, although it might not be very helpful for this one as it's come a bit late for them.
Yes, well, Liam, also, this migration, does it mask the level of economic inactivity too? The OBR did highlight just how high worklessness is in this country.
I think there's a pretty merry dance going on between the OBR and the Treasury, and I think if we read the tea leaves of this budget, that pattern's absolutely clear. Why is it that Jeremy Hunt just weeks ago was preparing the ground for really hefty cuts in income tax, which he was, cuts which he then had to rein back from? I think the reason is because the OBR pushed back and said income tax cuts, which of course cost £7 billion for each penny you reduce income tax, are very expensive because they apply to pensioners, they apply to landlords and people who get income from non-regular work. And that's why he went for national insurance cuts. This seems to me that there was a negotiation between Jeremy Hunt and the OBR, but a negotiation which the Chancellor was determined would not become a row which would burst out into the open, as has happened in the past. You know, we have experts, so-called, in Whitehall who can get pretty bolshy when they feel they're not being listened to. They can leak to newspapers. That often happens. We all know it. We're professional journalists. This is the world we live in. But it seems to me the Chancellor, who's very much a consensual, sort of feather-smoothing kind of personality, very, very different from the likes of Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss, who are much more combative, who, of course, fell out badly with the OBR, pretty much by ignoring them. The current Chancellor and Prime Minister, they've wanted to keep their powder dry with the OBR. It's clear that a lot of the growth we thought would happen hasn't happened. No one could have said back in September, October that the UK was going to be in recession in the back end of last year, as it turns out. All these things affect the public finances. Inflation has proved a lot more sticky than many people thought, and that high inflation means higher interest rates, means higher debt service costs, which means the public finances are tighter. This was an underwhelming budget. It wasn't a pre-election budget, but I think the Chancellor was very much hemmed in by an Office for Budget Responsibility that he was determined not to rile.
Well, let's raise that with Olivia. This didn't appear like a pre-election budget. We're expecting probably another fiscal event before the next election.
Well, I think that was really, really interesting. I mean, yesterday, you and I were speaking and we were saying that perhaps Jeremy Hunt had something else up his sleeve. The very fact that he announced that cut in national insurance before the budget, that's almost unprecedented for a Chancellor to do, we thought meant that there was going to be something else, that perhaps he would also cut income tax. He didn't cut income tax. What he said was he gave this sort of tantalising hint that the Conservatives' plan in the long term is to combine national insurance and income tax, but he wouldn't do it yet. Now, why wouldn't he do it yet? Possibly, as Liam says, because the OBR sort of spooked him out of it. It would be an expensive thing to do. There is it could possibly be inflationary, although Conservatives traditionally believe that if you lower taxes, people get to spend more of their own money, and eventually it will actually lower inflation as well. But he didn't do that, and I think Liam is probably right. When the mini budget, that disastrous Kwasi Kwarteng Liz Truss mini budget came out, it spooked the markets, it devalued the pound, etc. And it really scared politicians too. Jeremy Hunt is now so terrified of spooking the market that essentially he did very, very little. It was a very unradical budget. Well, that's all very well. He succeeded in not spooking the markets. But his other job with this budget was to try and win back some disillusioned voters. Will voters be won back by this 2p cut in national insurance? I mean, on the one hand, it does put £450 back into the pocket of the average worker every year. That's not a bad tax cut. But Jeremy Hunt did exactly the same last November, and it proved to have no boost in the polls for the Conservatives at all. And there are Conservative MPs who I've been speaking to who are saying, well, isn't that the first sign of madness, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results? So Jeremy Hunt had two tasks here, really: not to spook the markets, not to do a Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, and to win back some voters. He's managed the first. I think it remains to be seen whether he's managed the second.
And Liam, a row emerging over the oil and gas industry, specifically with the windfall tax.
Indeed. Just to respond slightly momentarily to Olivia, Hunt would push back, his people would push back and say the reason the first cut in national insurance hasn't registered yet is because we've only had it in one pay packet. It came in January. Most people haven't been paid for February yet. So that's why it hasn't registered, because it's only just come in, though I agree with you completely, it is small beans and it is offset by the ongoing increase in personal taxation because those thresholds that we speak about all the time have been frozen. Crikey, I've been in economics broadcasting for a quarter of a century. Never have so many of my colleagues been so keen for me to explain to them what fiscal drag is. It's become almost an everyday term, a sort of technical piece of economics. Absolutely right, Emily, to pick out this windfall tax. Again, it's Labour putting forward a policy which the Tories then pinch. As things currently stand, North Sea oil and gas operators, often quite small firms, not the big oil majors, often small UK firms loaded up with debt, 75% of their profits are now being taken in a windfall tax. Let's be clear, oil and gas companies in the North Sea have always paid corporation tax at a higher rate than everybody, ordinarily at 30% rather than it's now 25% for everyone else. Then they've always paid a 10% supplement on top of that. And then when the war in Ukraine began, the Tories brought in an extra 25%. That got them up to 65%. And then they brought in another 10%, 75%. Imagine doing a really capital-intensive project involving millions of borrowed pounds, and then suddenly your profits are taxed at 75% rather than 40%. Almost impossible to make that work. That's why the Scottish Conservatives have taken the very unusual step of saying within minutes of the Chancellor sitting down, they will back the budget as a whole, but when it comes to amendments on that windfall tax, they will oppose their own government. And there's a lot of pushback, not just from Tories, but also from parts of the Labour movement too. You talk to the GMB union, the second biggest union in this country, that has literally thousands of workers on those oil rigs working in the oil and gas complex up and down the country, which employs over 300,000 people all told. They really hate this windfall tax too, because when you have such a windfall tax, projects just cease to operate and you get no tax at all.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you very much indeed for that analysis. Liam Halligan, of course, economics and business editor, and Olivia Utley in Westminster, our political correspondent. And we didn't even get onto the NHS and the amount of money that's going into the health service, £6 billion more. Will it actually affect the change we need? Or is it time to, think of other options?
But, Emily, I've been doing some maths.
Go on, then.
Liz Truss, when she was doing that mini-budget that everyone freaked out about, she did these tax cuts, right? 20 billion was the cost of her national insurance tax cuts. 20 billion was the foregoing of revenue from corporation tax, and around 3 billion for the 45p rate. Well, we've kept the NI tax cuts.
Yep.
And so we've ditched the corporation tax cut. But then in the last two fiscal events, Jeremy Hunt has done a £10 billion tax cut and then a further £10 billion tax cut. We're only £3 billion off where Liz Truss was. We've
yes,
just done
but
it more
she announced
slowly.
a huge energy package, didn't she, at the same time, which was a crucial point in why it all didn't add up and spook the markets, I'd suggest. But
it's interesting, the total level of personal taxation, about the same level, very similar to where Liz Truss had promised. We've ended up there.
Well, coming up, as more money is pumped into the NHS, we're asking if now could be the time to abolish the health service altogether and to go for something a little different.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Mail on Sunday, and the University of Buckingham is calling out wokery at the University of Cambridge. So I guess the culture wars must be almost over then, Josh.
Almost, yeah. Cambridge University discriminating against rich, white, privileged, privately educated men, claims...
The worst
which
kind.
Is, basically me. Claims Vice-Chancellor of rival institution, which is launching a degree course on the rise of woke culture. Now, I 100% agree with this. I applied to get into Cambridge, and I didn't get in because I was too thick.
Oh, wow, so it wasn't the DEI mafia?
No, unfortunately, it was pre-DEI. So it's like a double insult now.
Were you one of those guys who was like had a B average? You know, you look like you should be an A because you act like an A.
I act like an A.
You act
I've
like
got
an
glasses.
A. Yeah.
They're fake. I don't even have to. They don't even have lenses in them.
Lewis, do you think that this is
a little bit cynical because I looked up this University of Buckingham, and they opened in 1973, and their tagline on the internet is the home of the two-year degree. They're trying to bring down Cambridge University with this.
Well, why not pick the biggest? I mean, that's why we should be attacking the BBC 24/7 on this thing.
I thought we were.
We aren't. We don't mention it enough.
this in?
What I found shocking about this story is Buckingham is the country's oldest private university, and was founded in 1976. Something is wrong there. What do you think? Was Oxford founded by the government? I don't think it was. Was Cambridge?
No, absolutely not. I looked up Cambridge was 1209.
Yes, exactly.
So you can
it
get.
wasn't a government
But this
grant.
is actually quite scary. They can do a course on the origins of the woke movement. I'm just saying, someone's going to have a degree, and our job is going to be under threat. They're going to know much more than us.
Never.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. 23 minutes past 12, and one of the announcements from yesterday's budget was designed to help small businesses, a raising of that threshold which businesses have to register for VAT. That went from £85,000 to £90,000. Doesn't sound like the most seismic move in the world, but there you go. The Chancellor claimed that will cut taxes and help small businesses grow.
Well, whilst the move has been welcomed by some, others in the industry think it does not go far enough and further support needs to be provided.
Let's speak now with the policy chair of the Federation of Small Businesses, Tina McKenzie. And Tina, I suppose there were little bits in this budget. There were tweaks there, here and there. But ultimately, is it what you wanted to see?
Well, certainly some of the things that he announced were very welcome. So, for example, he extended the loan recovery scheme, which we asked for. You know, the freezing of the fuel duty is quite important to our members, especially those in the countryside, out there in the rural areas, and those that rely on their vehicles for their business. But I think the big one for us was we've been asking for years for the threshold on VAT to be lifted. You know, for around 7 years, it's been the same at the 85,000. So never mind inflation, that hasn't moved. And I actually personally asked the Prime Minister at the conference in the hall about that, and we weren't getting much commitment. So we really do welcome the fact that they've moved it from the 85,000 to 90. We did ask for 100,000. But at least it's going in the right direction. And another welcome move for us was the reduction in the national insurance for the self-employed from 8% to 6%. That's definitely welcome. But if you ask the question, is that going to make the difference in this economy for small businesses and the entrepreneurs and the wealth creators? No, it's not really going to make that much of a difference. You know, we have asked for other things that would really make a difference and get the economy growing and get productivity up. Things like bringing the threshold on business rates up to 25,000. That would reinvigorate the high streets. That means that people that are the smaller business, the startups, get an opportunity. And, you know, we all know walking up and down our cities and our towns that we need to do something to help more businesses open and expand and grow. And the Chancellor knows that he can't get the economy growing unless the 99% of businesses that are SMEs actually are confident enough to invest. And that's what he's got to try and build. He's got to build that confidence.
No, it's really important to build that confidence. Thank you very much for talking through those issues with us, and best of luck to all of the businesses in your federation.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, the other thing that was in this budget was, of course, more money for the NHS. Now, I believe the NHS has been the only public spending area that has been ring-fenced over the course of the past decade or so.
Well, more than ring-fenced, what the Chancellor announced was something that anyone can find if they take the time to go on the King's Fund, that independent health statistics authority, which shows that there's been a 1/3 increase, real terms increase in NHS spending. It's risen by 1/3 from 2010 to today, gone from around 130 billion to over 180 billion in today's cash. An enormous rise. But of course, people don't feel like there's been a big rise.
Also, contrary to popular belief, the number of people working in the NHS has very much increased. We talk about staff shortages in the NHS, but actually the number of people employed by the organisation has gone up, 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 up. But are we feeling the benefits of our NHS on a day-to-day basis? Waiting lists, record high. It's taking a long time to get those down. Outcomes compared to international competitors not looking so good. And for crucial things like cancer, survival rates are not good. People can't get GP appointments. Is it time now to actually look at the NHS as a whole and think, can we do better?
Or is the Chancellor right? Is all we need a bit of technology in the NHS? Perhaps we'll massively increase the productivity of this behemoth if we halve the amount of paperwork that doctors and nurses have to do. That's the promise of the Chancellor. And, of course, insert new technical marvels like AI in diagnosis.
Well, joining us now is political commentator Reem Ibrahim and Dr. David Lloyd. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Reem, in the budget statement, more money for the NHS. Is this the $6 billion that's going to turn things around, or is it time to think of a different model?
Thank you, Emily. Well, it's almost farcical at this point, isn't it? Every time the Chancellor announces a budget, there is more money promised for the NHS, and yet we don't see those outcomes being implemented. There also seems to be this kind of the NHS seems to be politically untouchable. You know, any kind of fully institutional reform to the NHS seems to be politically impossible. People view the NHS as though it is a sacred cow, and we are spending just below £200 billion a year on our NHS. Now, what I found rather farcical was Jeremy Hunt's comparison to this idea that, you know, to be proud, we're proud to be British and we're proud of our NHS. Well, I'm not very proud of a healthcare system that is failing behind international standards. I'm not very proud of a healthcare system that effectively means that if we were to be implementing these kind of fully institutional reforms, there would be huge uproar across the country because people seem to be failing to understand that the solution is not throwing more money at a bureaucratic black hole. The solution is fully institutional reform.
Dr. David, is the NHS now beyond repair? A few billion here and there isn't going to fix what perhaps is an institutional failure?
I think the NHS is facing the same problems that most healthcare systems around the world are facing, which is that we've got a huge backlog from COVID. And we have a population that's getting older and everybody is getting more and more diseases. And the consequence of that is that it's ever more expensive to have a health system that works. Sure, we can abolish the NHS and go to another system. But if we're talking about money, and I think money seems to be the topic today, the average company worker in the United States, the company has to pay $26,000 per employee for their health care. And the employee has to pay $6,000 themselves. So you add that cost to the average company in the UK, and you suddenly find that you have UK PLC having to have huge costs, which makes us even more uncompetitive, which makes us much more difficult to find the growth that we need, to find the money that we need to pay for the vital public services. So it's not a good idea to get rid of the NHS economically. It's also not a good idea to get rid of the NHS on an egalitarian point of view. 7.7% of the US are uninsured. Bankruptcy is health costs are the commonest cause of bankruptcy. We don't want a system that is not free at the point of contact.
David, though, it doesn't feel very egalitarian at the moment, the NHS. If you have the money, you're going to go private to avoid those waiting lists.
Yes.
Reem, realistically, it would take a very brave person to abolish the NHS and start something from scratch. Surely there's a middle ground.
Well, the first point I'd like to make is that there are more than 2 countries in the world, and not everyone in the world has an NHS. We're actually a standalone in that respect. Most countries have a form of public and private partnerships. My favourite system would probably be the Singaporean system, in which effectively nobody goes without healthcare. Nobody is stuck with a heart attack and then a card machine comes out and they ask for payment. That's not how it works in reality. The Singaporean system effectively means that you are personally responsible for ensuring your healthcare. And if you, for things that are not catastrophic, things like dental care, things like routine checkups, you can act as a consumer as you would for shopping for your food at Sainsbury's or Asda or Tesco. You can shop around for the best services that you can. And again, if you can't afford it, the government will foot the bill. So this idea that the only other system in the world is the NHS and the US is completely farcical. It's completely untrue. Looking at countries like Germany, Sweden, Denmark, even France, these countries all have some form of public and private partnerships. And fundamentally, it's about allowing consumers to have that choice. And if we compete with different hospitals, we compete with different providers, consumers will have that choice. And also the actual system will be forced to compete with one another so that they can drive up standards. At the moment, we seem to think that the solution to every public service failure is spending more money. And
we're running out of time, so I'm just going to give the last word to Dr. David there. What can be done? One priority for the NHS that could help fix the problems.
We just need a pledge, I'm afraid, from the government that the NHS is the way to go. If you're going to chip away at the perception of the NHS and the middle class deserted, you will end up with an NHS that is just for emergencies, and then we will be sunk. So all this debate is great, but it just won't work any other way.
Well, there we go. Dr. David Lloyd, Reem Ibrahim, thank you very much both for your time. Sorry you have to leave it there. I think we could have talked about that all afternoon. Coming up, J.K. Rowling finds herself at the centre of a transgender row. We're asking if misgendering someone should be a crime. This is Good Afternoon Britain here on GB News.
Good afternoon, it's 12:33. The top stories from the GB Newsroom. Sir Keir Starmer says the government must explain how it'll fund a cut to national insurance announced in yesterday's budget. He made the comments during a visit to a construction site in the City of London today. Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves has claimed Jeremy Hunt delivered an omni-shambles budget. Around £10 billion has been spent on a 2p cut to the insurance rate, but its benefits are likely to be cancelled out by an expected rise in council tax. The non-dom tax status has also been scrapped, meaning that wealthy foreign residents will no longer get a tax break. Average house prices rose by 0.4% last month, the 5th monthly increase in a row. Halifax says prices grew by 1.7% on an annual basis compared to 2.3% the previous month. The average British home now costs just under £292,000. A woman who went on the run with her partner and newborn child has denied harming her baby. Constance Martin, who's 36 and comes from a wealthy aristocratic family, is on trial with her partner, 49-year-old Mark Gordon. Their newborn baby Victoria died while they were hiding from police in a tent in Sussex in wintry conditions last year. They allegedly went on the run in an attempt to keep the infant after 4 other children were taken into care. Ms. Martin denied harming the child, insisting she'd given her the best that any mother would. Both defendants deny wrongdoing. The case is continuing. Nationwide Building Society has reached an agreement to buy Virgin Money in a deal worth £2.9 billion. The planned takeover aims to create a combined lender worth more than £366 billion, making it Britain's second largest. It would eventually see the Virgin Money brand disappear, though Nationwide says it has no plans to cut jobs in the near term. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight, every night from 11 p.m.
Is a debate on gender really a far-right issue?
Far right. I'm so bored of that phrase, you know what I mean? Like anyone who talks about, anyone who acknowledges that there are two sexes is suddenly far right, because that's what Hitler and Mussolini were all about. This question from Shirley is, of course, about Labour. They've been accused of being undemocratic because they pressured a pub into cancelling a debate, and this debate features Kelly J. Keane, who's been on this show a couple of times, and she's a campaigner, and she was just on the panel, and then they got a letter saying that they couldn't do it because Kelly J. Keane apparently attracts far-right groups. Now, they've tried this trick before, but because some awful, ghastly neo-Nazi types turned up near to an event that she was holding in Australia, they kind of tried to blame that on her and suggest that the two were the same thing. They weren't. That was an opportunistic group turning up to... They're not... Neo-Nazis aren't pro-feminist. They're not pro an event called Let Women Speak. That's just ridiculous.
New Zealand's TV blurred her touching her zip because they said that her touching her zip was a far-right dog whistle because she's making that symbol.
Yeah, but she wasn't making the symbol, she was just adjusting a zip.
Yeah,
and
also, this isn't a far-right symbol.
I mean, that was incredible because she obviously wasn't making that symbol anyway. She was just adjusting a top. But this New Zealand news channel blurred out the hand so that they could pretend that it was some horrible ghastly... Yeah. I mean, this is learning stuff, isn't it?
She's talked about having voted Labour in the past. She's so not far-right.
But also,
I mean...
even if she were right-wing, which she isn't, why would they be banning a panel where there's a discussion about one of the most important issues of our day? What are Labour playing at here?
They're anti-democratic, aren't they? They're just kind of playing whack-a-mole with things they don't like. I think maybe I'll write to the pub and say I do want to see Kelly J. Keane there.
Yeah, but they won't listen to you
well,
if you
no,
say that, will they? Because
won't.
you've got the unfashionable opinion, Chris.
Well, and the unfashionable workplace.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Now, small businesses. Yesterday's budget offered to help them with a VAT threshold raise from 85k to 90k. It's not the most interesting bit of the budget, but what is interesting is small businesses and how they might grow.
Yes, indeed. Well, I believe we're going to GB News West Midlands reporter Jack Carson, who's in Tamworth, getting the very latest reaction. Jack, so the dust has settled on the budget. What are the great people of Tamworth thinking?
Yeah, exactly. It has, of course, those commitments and those promises that Jeremy Hunt made at the dispatch box yesterday. How exactly are they going down in the places that are going to be affected? Businesses across the UK. We're here in Tamworth and in Bellow. We're joined with Carl Raffer, who's the director here. Carl, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Just kind of give me then a bit of reaction to Jeremy Hunt's budget yesterday.
I think clearly it's laying a pathway to a general election. So while there's no big surprises, I would say it's been designed to really whet the appetite of voters.
Yeah, and what did you make of it? How much of what he said might kind of impact you and make your life and business maybe a little bit easier?
Well, ultimately, I think as a small business, there's very little in the budget for us. But what we have seen is a very nice gesture from a national insurance perspective, which will benefit our team. But from a small business perspective, very little for us.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that maybe there's been some criticism that there wasn't anything to do with business rates. Is that something maybe you would have liked to have seen? How do you feel about that wasn't changed?
Absolutely. I think, you go into every budget hoping there's something there. So would I like to see a business rate change? 100%. But what we have had is some opportunity, I guess, to make the most of it in other parts of our business.
Yeah, of course, full expensing, one of those things that's been extended for the next, year or so. So what kind of impact was that have? Because obviously you're here, you do merchandising, branding, you've got a lot of equipment. I imagine that must be, a big help to you, that full expensing.
Full expensing definitely will make a huge impact to us, and actually for other businesses, slightly smaller businesses maybe, who are on the cusp of VAT, I think the increase in threshold there will certainly help them as well.
Yeah, and of course it's not just a business owner as well, you've also been a paramedic in, there's lots of commitments to the NHS as well about efficiency. From maybe your experience within the NHS, what are some of the announcements that Jeremy Hunt made yesterday? Do you think they're going to have an impact about productivity, about trying to fund new IT systems to improve efficiency?
I think, look, we can't buy our way out of the problem with the NHS. We've tried so many times. So I do think it's positive to see that actually we're taking that step into AI. But the problems there relate to blame, excuses and denial. We really need to get to the core issue. And the core issue is the leadership and the management of the NHS.
All right, well, Carl, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. We'll hear a little bit more from Carl a little bit later on, getting that reaction to those, of course, promises and commitments that Jeremy Hunt made at the budget yesterday.
Marvellous stuff, Jack. We love to hear from real people on the ground. How is this affecting us all across the country? That's all what GB News is meant to be about.
Indeed it is. But coming up, J.K. Rowling is reported to the police, allegedly. We're asking if misgendering someone should be a crime. It's all kicked off online.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Tomorrow's going to be a mostly fine day for many of us, but before then, we do have a few showers to watch out for. At the moment, there is a southeasterly flow across the country. That's being brought on by high pressure towards the northeast of the UK. Worth bearing in mind, this flow is quite brisk and those winds are going to pick up as we go into tomorrow. There will be a few showers this evening across parts of Wales. They will then push into Northern Ireland overnight, and also some showery outbreaks across parts of northeast England and Scotland too. Could be a bit of sleet or snow over the highest ground. Otherwise, a mostly dry night and even some clear skies developing in the south and across parts of northwest Scotland. Clear skies and shelter from the wind in prone rural spots could lead to a touch of frost tomorrow morning. Otherwise, and as we go through tomorrow, apart from a few showery outbreaks of rain through the morning across parts of Scotland and northeast England, it's looking like a dry day, and we will see increasing amounts of sunshine, particularly across many parts of England and Wales and also western Scotland. Meanwhile, areas exposed to that southeasterly wind likely to remain a bit cloudier, and temperatures will be a touch lower than today for many of us, with a wind chill, especially across northern parts. Into the weekend, and it's looking a bit wetter for many of us. There will be some unsettled weather pushing its way in from the southwest as we go through Saturday. So in southern areas, it's likely to turn pretty wet at times over the next few days. A bit more showery further north. Temperatures may pick up on Saturday before dropping down by Monday.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Right, it's 12:45. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain, and you've been getting in touch after that debate about the state of the NHS and whether it's actually time to abolish the thing in favour of something else, of course, in favour of an alternative model. Paul says the NHS should have been scrapped years ago. It's a black hole and not fit for purpose. Strong stuff.
And Robert says, don't ever suggest that the NHS ceases to exist. The NHS is one of the treasures we have left in Britain. Mismanagement by highly paid individuals has to be investigated and union activities restricted.
A lot of people would agree with you on that. When there's polling done about the NHS, overwhelmingly, people support it. Susan says, listening to your young lady talking about basically getting rid of the NHS, I'd suggest to her that she go visit a country without an NHS. If she has an ounce of humanity, she would change her mind. It's not about money and spreadsheets. It's about people's well-being and health. But the problem is, Susan, when you look at the outcomes, i.e. whether people are being treated and survival rates and whether they're treated and then their health improves, we're not doing that well. We're not actually doing that well compared to other countries.
If you're still watching, please do get back in touch. I'd just like to ask you this question. Have you ever been to France? Have you ever been to Germany? Have you ever been to the Netherlands? Have you ever been to Denmark? Have you ever been to Belgium? Have you ever been to Switzerland? Have you ever been to any of these countries, none of which have the NHS? They've got a form of universal healthcare, but it's through a mixed delivery. And I think that's what Reem was arguing for. She wasn't saying have no healthcare at all.
Or the American model.
Or the American model. She was saying there are lots of European countries. Well, she actually liked the Singaporean model best. I think that might be going a little bit beyond the realm of
possibility.
But I mean, Australia even. They don't have an NHS. In Australia, if you're a higher rate taxpayer and you don't take out private insurance, you get a tax penalty. Now, that means that they encourage, through their tax system, people who can afford it to pay for their own insurance, and people who can't afford it get better services through a less crowded state system.
Well, Bob says NHS is increasing its staff numbers, but are they in the right areas? Far too many in diversity, inclusion and... Oh, he said in division, exclusion and inequality. He's turned it on its head. Very
funny.
clever.
That's
Very
funny.
clever, Bob. That is a question. I mean, you often see job adverts for the NHS and a lot of them have absolutely nothing to do with healthcare.
No, although it is a massive organisation. It's the largest employer in Britain. And
the world, isn't it?
I do understand... I think the Chinese army might say something about that. I don't know. but
Europe.
Perhaps. I think what is interesting is that perhaps it does make sense in areas to have non-clinical roles. If you have doctors who spend their entire time just filling out forms, why employ a doctor on six-figure salaries who could be filling out these forms? Wouldn't it be more efficient to employ a manager, a non-clinical person who's doing the backroom stuff?
Better yet, Tom, a robot.
Ooh.
Well, let's move on, because...
Now you've sparked my interest.
He loves robots. Anyway, trans journalist India Willoughby has reported, she claims to have reported, author J.K. Rowling to the police for an alleged hate crime. What's the hate crime? For misgendering her in online posts.
Well, Miss Rowling refused to refer to Willoughby as a woman when engaging with online debate about all-female locker rooms.
But the Harry Potter author has responded, claiming that Willoughby's obsessive targeting of her may meet the legal threshold for harassment.
Oh, good. More police action. Each way, tit for tat. Well, let's discuss this with the co-founder and executive director of Sex Matters, Maya Forstarter. Maya, this is an extraordinary case. Why on earth are Twitter rows spilling out into our legal system and police?
Well, India said that he reported J.K. Rowling for misgendering. Whether the police take that seriously as a crime, it's yet to be seen. But people are using the police as their own private force to harass other people. J.K. Rowling, of course, can say that India Willoughby is a man. There's no crime.
See, Tom here...
Well, I rolled
didn't
my
like
eyes
it when you said he.
When you pointedly said he as the second word in your set, that was clearly deliberate. That was clearly provocative. I mean,
Well,
it's just not very nice.
Well, you may say that, and that's fine. But as long as the police don't come knocking on my door, I don't care if you roll your eyes. Go ahead, roll.
That's fair enough. I think we can absolutely agree there. I don't think the police should be involved in any of this. But isn't there a point here about what J.K. Rowling was saying? 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when J.K. Rowling sort of entered this form of debate, she would refer, I think, to trans people by the way in which I think most decent people would say, if a trans woman wants to be called she, we'll call you she. It seems that J.K. Rowling has gone beyond that now, has sort of gone down a path away from a more moderate position that she expressed when she first went into this debate, what some would describe as going down a rabbit's hole.
Is that true, Maya?
I think people are free to choose to use their own words, and J.K. Rowling is one of our best writers. She's very clear which words she chooses. India Willoughby is acting like an angry, woman-hating man. He is going after J.K. Rowling's appearance, my appearance, the appearance of the women who had lunch with J.K. Rowling last year, calling us frumpy, calling us fat, talking about our shoes. That's the kind of thing that you get from women-hating men. And in order to say this is the behaviour that we're seeing, it's necessary to call him he.
Maya, India has also perpetrated this alleged crime with the misgendering.
Apparently so, yes. I think India called Debbie Hayton he, who is another trans-identified man. It's clearly pronouns are not a crime. What India has done more seriously is he tweeted what van would be large enough to kidnap J.K. Rowling, Joanna Cherry and myself, referring to me as mayo potato. I mean, it's childish, but it's also scary to have a man talking about kidnapping you on the internet.
I think the words that India Willoughby have used are horrible, and it really shows the depth that this debate has plunged to online. But isn't what?
But do you think J.K. Rowling is a transphobe?
Yes, I do actually now.
You think she's a transphobe?
I didn't when she first came out and wrote that tweet where she was like, live as you want. If you're discriminated, I'd march with you. All that sort of stuff. She used to present a much more moderate position on her views, and I think a position that I think a lot of people would moderately say, absolutely, in sport, let's have this discussion. In certain areas...
Oh, yeah, but you don't even like it when it comes to sport, Maya.
But now she walks around calling trans women he.
Maya, has J.K. Rowling become an extremist?
I think she's just being clear. I mean, the thing is, Tom, there are all kinds of words for talking about men, male, boy, he. They all mean the same thing. And all of them have been called transphobic. So, you're talking about pronouns, but in order to talk about why we don't want men in female sports, we need to be able to say that they're men, that they're male. And all
Maya, can I just ask you, we're running out of time, but do you think, you know J.K. Rowling, you've had many discussions with her, do you think that she has moved from the position that she first announced a few years ago? Do you think she agrees with you more than she used to?
I think she still respects everyone's human rights, but she's trying to be clear about the difference between men and women. And that means we need to be able to use clear language.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time, Maya Forstatter. Great to speak to you. Stay with us because we're going to be debating next whether the ISIS bride Shamima Begum should be allowed to return to the UK. The UN has had a lot to say about this.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Tomorrow's going to be a mostly fine day for many of us, but before then, we do have a few showers to watch out for. At the moment, there is a southeasterly flow across the country, and that's being brought on by high pressure towards the northeast of the UK. Worth bearing in mind, this flow is quite brisk and those winds are going to pick up as we go into tomorrow. There will be a few showers this evening across parts of Wales. They will then push into Northern Ireland overnight, and also some showery outbreaks across parts of northeast England and Scotland too. Could be a bit of sleet or snow over the highest ground. Otherwise, a mostly dry night and even some clear skies developing in the south and across parts of northwest Scotland. Clear skies and shelter from the wind in prone rural spots could lead to a touch of frost tomorrow morning. Otherwise, and as we go through tomorrow, apart from a few showery outbreaks of rain through the morning across parts of Scotland and northeast England, it's looking like a dry day, and we will see increasing amounts of sunshine, particularly across many parts of England and Wales and also western Scotland. Meanwhile, areas exposed to that southeasterly wind likely to remain a bit cloudier, and temperatures will be a touch lower than today for many of us, with a wind chill especially across northern parts. Into the weekend, and it's looking a bit wetter for many of us. There will be some unsettled weather pushing its way in from the southwest as we go through Saturday. So in southern areas, it's likely to turn pretty wet at times over the next few days. A bit more showery further north. Temperatures may pick up on Saturday before dropping down by Monday.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're springing into spring and giving you the chance to win the seasonal essentials. First, there's an incredible £12,345 in tax-free cash to be won, plus a spring shopping spree with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. And finally, a garden gadget package to enjoy, including a handheld games console, a portable smart speaker and a pizza oven. For your chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel. I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Thursday, the 7th of March.
Immigration is not cost-free. That's according to damning analysis for the OBR. The Quango has revised up its net migration estimate to 315,000 people each year in the medium term. Can our public services cope?
And the United Nations are now demanding Britain repatriate Shamima Begum and review the decision to revoke her citizenship. Should the UN even have a say? And should we let her return to the UK? We'll be having that debate.
And major defence spending concerns after there were no major announcements in yesterday's budget, with an ex-armed forces minister saying, does Russia have to get to Warsaw before we start spending what we need on defence?
Well, we just spoke to Maya Forstatter from Sex Matters about the row between J.K. Rowling and the trans journalist India Willoughby. And I'm judging by our inbox, a lot of people at home think that you're a bit ridiculous on this issue, Tom.
Well, I think I am the only person standing in the moderate place on this. I think there are people who go crazy on either side of this debate. And I think being unnecessarily rude to trans people, calling them he if they want to be called she, is rude and wrong. But I also think talking about throwing people into the back of a van is ridiculous and wrong.
But previously, you've argued something that I would call quite radical, arguing that, you know, if you're a transgender woman and you happen to be petite, then you can play in all sports.
I've just been quoting what the guidelines are for lots of major sports.
And those guidelines are shifting quite a lot, aren't they?
Well, no, there are lots of different rules. So, one of the rules, for example, with swimming, that was celebrated by people on the sort of gender-critical side of this debate, are that people who go through male puberty can't swim in female teams. Now, there are some trans women who did not go through male puberty. Even under those rules that have changed, there are some trans women who would be allowed in those teams.
I just don't think that you can mansplain this issue. This is an issue for women.
Now you're sounding like a leftist.
No, I'm not sounding like a leftist.
Early 2010s.
I just think you don't know what you're talking about on this one, and you live in a fairyland, and you can completely understand why women are uncomfortable with those who are biologically male competing in their sports, and also with this row between J.K. Rowling and India Willoughby. It absolutely should not be against the law, and I'm sure it won't be. I'm sure J.K. Rowling will not be found guilty. Should never be against the law to misgender someone. I mean,
what a
absurd.
moment of glorious agreement. There we go. We can settle on where the law should be. Even if people should be free to disagree, they should be free to disagree well.
And we do it so well here. Here's your headlines.
Good afternoon. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister refused to say how the government would fund a plan to abolish employee contributions to national insurance. Around £10 billion has been spent on a 2p cut to the insurance rate, but its benefits are likely to be cancelled out by an expected rise in council tax. Rishi Sunak says British workers deserve to be recognised.
The direction of travel is now crystal clear. Our plans are working because of the improvement in the economic environment, because of the fact we've been able to get inflation down from 11% to 4%, mortgage rates, energy bills falling, wages rising. We've been able to start cutting people's taxes responsibly, and that shows that our plans are working. I believe in a society where hard work is rewarded. We're delivering that for people, and they can see that the change we're talking about is starting to happen. And if we stick to the plan, we can make sure that everyone has peace of mind.
Sir Keir Starmer says that unlike the government, Labour's policies are fully funded.
Contrast that with the government, where yesterday, at the end of the budget, the Chancellor made a staggering £46 billion unfunded commitment to abolish national insurance. That's bigger than Liz Truss's commitment, so they've learned absolutely nothing. We need change. It's time for change.
Forecasters are predicting household disposable income to fall by 0.9%. That would make this Parliament the first in modern history to see a drop in living standards. We asked residents in Nottingham for their reaction to yesterday's budget.
I don't make a lot of a budget, to be fair. I think it's a scummy attempt by the Conservative Party to try and regain any bit of ground that they can get, really. I think they know they're in a difficult situation and it's not going to pan out well for them.
We need to see results on the NHS, seeing a GP. Things that really matter, not beer duty.
There's nothing for the ordinary working man. Conservatives and Labour, they're both the same. There's no difference. We need a change.
To other news, a woman who went on the run with her partner and newborn child has denied harming her baby. Constance Martin, who's 36 and comes from a wealthy aristocratic family, is on trial with her partner, 49-year-old Mark Gordon. Their newborn baby Victoria died while they were hiding from police in a tent on the South Downs in Sussex in wintry conditions last year. They allegedly went on the run in an attempt to keep the infant after 4 other children were taken into care. Speaking today in court, Ms Martin denied harming the child, insisting she'd given her the best that any mother would. Both defendants deny wrongdoing. The case is continuing. MPs are warning the Post Office is not fit to run any compensation schemes for the victims of the Horizon IT scandal and should be excluded. The Business and Trade Committee published recommendations for delivering payments to hundreds of victims, describing efforts so far as abject failure. The committee says an independent body should be appointed to lead the process. The chairman described it as a national disgrace that only £1 out of every £5 of the budget for compensation has been paid out. The government will attempt to overturn amendments to its flagship immigration policy after it suffered heavy defeats in the House of Lords. Commons leader Penny Mordaunt confirmed today that the Safety of Rwanda bill will return to the Lords on the 18th of March. MPs will get a chance to debate and vote on the amendments in the following week. Peers in the House of Lords made several changes to the bill, including allowing courts to question the safety of the East African nation. A missile attack killed 3 sailors on a Red Sea merchant ship yesterday, the first fatality since the Houthis began targeting commercial shipping. The rebel group, who are backed by Iran, claimed responsibility. The Foreign Secretary, Lord David Cameron, says he's appalled by the deaths of the sailors, calling it a reckless and indiscriminate attack. Britain and the United States are continuing retaliatory strikes against the Houthis. Nationwide Building Society has reached an agreement to buy Virgin Money in a deal worth £2.9 billion. The planned takeover would create a combined lender worth more than £366 billion. It would eventually see the Virgin Money brand disappear, though Nationwide says it has no plans to cut jobs in the near term. And a new train service between London and central Scotland has been given the go-ahead. The rail regulator approved plans to operate 4 daily return services between London Euston and the city of Stirling. It'll create new competition for LNER, which currently operates services on that route. Grand Union Trains is due to launch its new services by June next year. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. 8 minutes past 1, and the Prime Minister has said that yesterday's budget shows his plan is working while on a visit to South Yorkshire today. Let's hear what he had to say.
Oh, well, we will hear what he has to say. I imagine he'll say, this is exactly what the plan, how it's working, everything's going right, just stick with us.
He'll say he's cutting taxes, even though the tax burden's going up. He'll say that the plan is working, even though we're yet to see the full details of the plan. But let's hear his words now.
Everyone recognised which necessitated the government stepping in rightly to support people, families, businesses through those difficult times. And that's, of course, had an impact on things. And I think people will recognise that. But the direction of travel is now crystal clear. Our plans are working because of the improvement in the economic environment, because of the fact we've been able to get inflation down from 11% to 4%, mortgage rates, energy bills falling, wages rising. We've been able to start cutting people's taxes responsibly. And the 2 tax cuts that have been announced at the end of last year and just now mean a tax cut worth around £900 for an average person in work earning 35k. Half of it kicked in January, the other half in a few weeks in April. And that shows that our plans are working. I believe in a society where hard work is rewarded. We're delivering that for people, and they can see that the change we're talking about is starting to happen. And if we stick to the plan, we can make sure that everyone has peace of mind, that there's a brighter future for them and their family, and we can all have a renewed sense of pride in the country.
But
It's the highest tax burden in 70 years. Are you comfortable with that tax burden?
Unfortunately, country's been through, hopefully once-in-a-century type events with a pandemic and a war in Ukraine, and the government stepped in with an extraordinary amount of support for the NHS, for the vaccine rollout, furlough, help with people's energy bills. Those were the right things to do at the time. But now, because the situation has improved, because our plan is working, we've got inflation down from 11% to 4%, wages have been rising faster than prices for several months, energy bills are coming down. We've been able to cut people's taxes responsibly. So everyone in work and self-employed seeing a tax cut worth around £900 for an average person in work on 35k. Half of that's already kicked in January, the other half in a few weeks in April. It shows that our plan is working. I want a country where hard work is rewarded, and if we stick to this plan, people can have peace of mind that there's a brighter future ahead.
And on national insurance, you released a video yesterday on the budget implying a longer-term plan to scrap national insurance altogether. And former chancellors like Philip Hammond said that that was an important contribution principle of the national insurance. Do you agree? And if you scrap it, how will you fund it?
So I believe in a simpler, fairer tax system. And at the moment, we do have something that's overly complex. Everyone in work is paying tax twice, once in income tax, once in national insurance. That's unnecessarily complicated because all that money ultimately goes into the same pot to fund the same public services. But it's also unfair because it's not right that people in work face this double taxation compared to everything else. So my ultimate long-term ambition is to end that unfairness. And if we stick to our plan, we'll be able to make good progress towards that goal in the next Parliament. And we've already showed that we mean business with cutting national insurance by a third in just 6 months, delivering a £900 tax cut. And as I said, if we stick with our plan, we'll be able to make good progress towards our long-term goal of ending that unfairness entirely over the next Parliament.
But how will you fund it?
I said what people can see from me, and I think they trust me on these things, is that I will always do this responsibly. We've funded our current tax cuts responsibly. Borrowing has not increased. We're still on track to meet our fiscal rules that have our debt falling. We've also made sure that we keep investing in our public services, especially the NHS, which received more funding yesterday, which was welcomed by the NHS CEO. And that's what you get when you stick to a plan. We can invest in the NHS, we can cut people's taxes, and we can continue to have our debt on a falling trajectory. That shows that our plan is working. It's the right plan, and if we stick with it, we really can give everyone the peace of mind that there's a brighter future ahead. And the alternative, the choice at the next election, is clear, because our plan is starting to deliver the positive change that people want to see. The alternative with Labour, who don't have a plan, is all that progress would be eroded, and we would just go back to square one.
Now, Michelle.
Well, there we are. That was the Prime Minister responding to questioning about the budget yesterday, and also, to some extent, sounding like he's delivering a bit of an election pitch. The choice between him and Keir Starmer, someone without a plan and someone with a plan that's beginning to work. Those are the words of the Prime Minister.
What happens, though, when Keir Starmer sets out his plan? He will have to eventually before the election, and then you can't really argue that they have no plan. But are you convinced? Let us know. Let's speak to GB News political correspondent Olivia Rutley, who joins us now. Olivia, Rishi Sunak saying the same thing over and over again. We've got a plan, it's working, inflation's down. Of course, we want to get the tax burden down too. Do you think people will be convinced by it?
Well, on the one hand, he says that he's got a plan that's beginning to work. And to be fair to him, it was quite politically savvy, really, of Jeremy Hunt yesterday to introduce that tax cut, the removal of the tax cut for non-DOMs, because all of Labour's plans, pretty much, were built on the idea that it was going to scrap the non-DOM tax exemption. And now the Tories have just taken the wind out of Labour's sails by doing the same thing a few months in advance. So Labour is now going to have to come up with a whole new plan for how it's going to pay for all of the very expensive pledges that it's made without raising taxes, which it's promised not to do. So I guess in a way, Rishi Sunak has a point. He does have a plan, and right at this moment, Labour doesn't really have a plan on how it's going to pay for everything. But some of the rest of the things that he said in that little clip there, I'm a bit more sceptical about, and I'm not sure how well they're going to play with the public. He says that national debt is going to be on a downwards trajectory. Well, the predictions are that, yes, in the latter half of this decade, it will be. But for now, national debt is very high indeed. He talks about cutting taxes. Well, again, technically, yes, he has done this cut to national insurance, 2p off national insurance. That will put £450 in the pocket of the average worker this year. But, of course, income tax thresholds have frozen. Now, fiscal drag, everyone's heart sinks a bit, I think, when you hear the word fiscal drag. It sounds very boring. But essentially, what it means is that because income tax thresholds have stayed the same against a backdrop of rising inflation, it means that all sorts of people whose wages have gone up have now been pulled into those higher tax brackets. So people like nurses and teachers, who were never really high earners, are now considered high earners because the threshold at which they define a high earner was set sort of 10, 15 years ago when inflation was much, much lower. So actually, although Rishi Sunak says that he's cutting taxes, people will be worse off by 2027 than they would have been had thresholds risen with inflation as they should have done. So again, it's a technicality, really. Any tax cuts that he's made have been eclipsed by an overall rise in personal taxation over the last 13 years of Tory government. And I think the public is probably going to notice that. There are plenty of Conservative MPs I've spoken to who are fed up that those income tax thresholds haven't risen, and they've spoken to their constituents who are feeling poorer. They might not know exactly why, they might not completely get their heads around fiscal drag, but they know that there is less money in their pockets. Was this budget enough to change their minds and to get them voting Conservative? Well, we'll have to wait and see. Perhaps when people start to feel the effect of that national insurance cut in a couple of months' time, when they start getting their paychecks, maybe they will. Maybe we will see a poll bounce for the Conservatives. We'll have to wait and see.
Goodness
Thank you very much, Olivia.
I heard the Chancellor being called a fiscal drag queen this morning on the radio.
By who?
By who? By a BBC journalist by the name of Amal Rajan. He raised it a number of times, and the Chancellor kept saying, "Well, why did you call me a drag queen? Why did you call me a drag queen?" It was, I know, but I suppose if it gets across the message, the vital message of fiscal drag, why not?
Yes, I think fiscal drag does get you excited, actually.
Do you reckon?
Yes, unlike many people. But anyway, it cost taxpayers £15,000 to cover damages paid to an academic science secretary who Michelle Donnellan falsely accused of supporting Hamas. So essentially, the taxpayer forked out £15,000 for legal fees on behalf of a minister who wrongly accused an academic of supporting Hamas.
Well, on Tuesday, Ms Donnellan retracted the comments that she made about Professor Kate Sang last year, but the taxpayers are on the hook for them. Let's speak to Elliot Keck, the head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance. And Elliot, should the taxpayers be on the hook for a mistake that was made by a minister? Obviously, the department would argue she made that mistake in her role as Education Secretary.
Well, good afternoon, Tom. And as you said, the department have put out a statement saying that ministers are entitled to legal costs on matters relating to their responsibilities and conduct as a minister. I think when it comes to responsibilities, that's entirely justified. Ministers are obviously dealing with huge departments, dealing with a huge range of issues and deserve support. When it comes to their conduct, that's where I think it becomes a lot more debatable. I think Michelle Donnellan has made quite a serious mistake here on an incredibly sensitive issue. It's something that she should have been much, much more careful about. And I think taxpayers will rightly be unhappy about being left on the hook for this.
And of course, opposition parties are making a noise about this. You've got the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, all demanding that Michelle Donnellan pay her own legal fees. I do wonder how much this happens.
Well, it's a very interesting question. I think that is a question that I have, that a lot of taxpayers are going to have. Has this happened before? Has this similar case happened? As I said, you know, if a minister is being taken to court or there's threats because of their responsibilities, you know, let's take for one example, the Scottish government is paying the court costs of when it took the UK government to court over the Gender Recognition Act. Now, I think that's an entirely appropriate and entirely sensible. That's a very real pressing issue related to how legislation is passed. But when it's something like this, where frankly, the minister makes a quite serious allegation on a very sensitive issue and frankly, clearly gets it wrong, that's incredibly worrying. And I think that's why taxpayers will be really questioning.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Elliot Keck, their head of campaigns at the Taxpayers Alliance. Tom, it's difficult, isn't it? Because it is in her role. Should your employer pay for your legal fees when it comes to getting something wrong? I mean, £15,000. What do you think?
Are you asking for advice? Have you said something wrong?
No, I haven't said it. I never say anything wrong. But
the way you say, should your employer? I think the question is, should the taxpayer? I mean, just for self-preservation strategy, I would just say absolutely my employer should pay. No.
I don't know. I mean, £15,000. I think the question really is, how many times has the taxpayer coughed up for similar?
Yeah.
This can't be the first time that a minister has accused someone wrongly of something and had to deal with the legal...
Isn't it? She chose to save cash to settle rather than to pursue this further. Perhaps if she was doing this as a private citizen, she might have wanted to fight it and see if she would win. My understanding is that they settled. Now the matter is closed, and that has curtailed the whole process, which might have saved the taxpayers' money. I don't know. Well, compared to what it could have been.
Well, coming up, the United Nations are demanding that Shamima Begum, the ISIS bride, is repatriated. But should they even be getting involved in this? Is it their business?
Nana Queer, weekends from 3 p.m.
So after his mad dash to see his father last week, Prince Harry predictably went on TV to talk about it. He gave his first interview to Good Morning America, whilst apparently being filmed by a crew that were doing a documentary on the Invictus Games. He didn't disclose his father's diagnosis, but frankly, even the fact that he was on TV talking about it was concerning. No wonder they're keeping him at arm's length. This is what he said.
How did you get the news that the king was ill?
I spoke to him.
And what did you do next?
I jumped on a plane and went to go and see him as soon as I could.
How was that visit for you emotionally?
Look, I love my family. The fact that I was able to get on a plane and go and see him and spend any time with him, I'm grateful for that.
An illness in the family can have a galvanizing or sort of reunifying effect for a family.
Absolutely.
Is that possible in this case?
Yeah, I'm sure. Throughout all these families, I see it on a day-to-day basis. The strength of the family unit coming together.
He also said that he loves his family, but then he said that he had his own family in America. So which family does he love? The late Queen's last few years of life were marred with accusations of racism, which Harry later backtracked on, claiming that they hadn't actually used the word, so inadvertently admitting to gaslighting us all. But the Sussex's stock is falling in the States, and the only thing that makes them interesting is their proximity to the royal family. And now the king is ill, Harry has even offered to muck in and take on official duties to help his father. Look, I want to see reconciliation and love and joy, but I'm afraid Meghan has yet to even speak to her father as far as we know, and Harry didn't apparently even reach out to his brother. Whilst his dad might fall for it, I doubt William will be as soft. Good luck with that, Harry.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, it's 1:24. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. And UN experts are demanding Britain repatriate Shamima Begum and review the decision to revoke her citizenship.
Yes, these experts over at the United Nations say that Begum remains stripped of her citizenship, vulnerable, and denied assistance and protection as a possible victim of trafficking.
So we're asking, is the UN right? And should Shamima Begum return? Joining us now to debate this is GB News presenter Patrick Christys, who thinks absolutely not, and author and broadcaster Rebecca Reid, who wants Begum back in Britain. Well, there you go. Patrick, firstly, two questions here, really. Should these UN experts have a say at all? And should we heed their advice?
Well, I don't think the UN have really got any credibility when it comes to this. We have to look at who we're dealing with here. This is the group of people who have refused to change the definition of what it means to be a refugee or asylum seeker, which, as far as I can understand it now, means that any woman, anyone who is gay or, dare I say it, pretending to be gay, or anyone who wants to move from a poorer country into a richer country, essentially can do that. This is the same United Nations that slammed Rwanda despite sending people to Rwanda. It's the same United Nations that slammed the conditions Shamima Begum is kept in, despite having camps very similar to the one Begum is in all across the third world. I don't really think they have any credibility. I think they're now essentially a woke lobby group for open borders. What I will say, though, is a question of who do you believe? Do you believe that lot? OK, or do you believe successive Home Secretaries, successive Prime Ministers, and crucially, most compellingly, do you believe members of our intelligence services who say absolutely not to Begum coming back?
Well, Rebecca, this is the point, isn't it? Our Court of Appeal has already rejected her appeal to stay in this country and have her citizenship back. Why should the UN then have a say, or at least experts within the UN?
Well, who do you believe is a good question? And in this instance, I would suggest that maybe we should believe Jacob Rees-Mogg, our colleague, who is somebody who I generally speaking do not agree with, but who wrote a fantastic piece last week or the week before about why the decision to strip Shamima Begum of her citizenship was wrong, immoral, and racist. And he used the word racist. And I think if you get any topic where Jacob and I agree, then there must be a correct central opinion there, because you've never met two people who agree on less. Fundamentally, the reason the UN have got involved is that their mission statement is to intercede on issues that transcend boundaries and borders. That's their sort of mission statements. And because we made her stateless, this doesn't. Sorry, I've got a really bad cold. I can't really breathe. Because we've made her stateless, we have forced a situation where bodies like the UN are obliged to intervene. Now, we don't have to listen to what the UN says. This is a bit like if I said, I think James Corden should stop doing comedy. I can say it. The UN can say whatever they want. We don't have to do anything. But fundamentally, enough very sensible people are making this point that perhaps maybe we should consider listening to them.
Well, Rebecca, I'm delighted that you've upgraded Jacob Rees-Mogg to a very sensible person. But, Patrick... Isn't Jacob Rees-Mogg right here? It's just wrong-headed. She's our fault. She's our responsibility.
Look, I like Jacob. I've got a huge amount of time for him. I don't think Jacob Rees-Mogg is going to be living anywhere near Shamima Begum, though, is he? Or in any of the circumstances surrounding where she would be. There is a security threat here. It's a question mark as to whether or not we want to allow a jihadi bride pin-up in order to come back to Britain. It isn't racist, by the way. We have actually, certainly around 2016 and 2017, when ISIS were towards their pomp, we actually let an astonishing number of returning ISIS jihadis come back. So clearly there is actual distinctive intelligence on this. Can I also just say, I actually think we're at risk here of this being slightly irrelevant, and let me tell you why. Because I think that Shamima Begum's family lawyer, Tasneem Akunji, is probably going to become the next MP beating the Labour candidate in Bethnal Green, OK? I think Keir Starmer's going to win a majority, and I reckon he's going to be under massive pressure to appease a certain section of the community that has, as we all know, shunned him. I think, under a Labour government, in a couple of years' time, Shamima will be back in Britain anyway.
Wow, there is a prediction. Well, Rebecca Reid, let's continue on this tangent for a second. I suppose this is something that Keir Starmer said back when this all blew up as an issue, that he would want Shamima Begum back in the UK. Are we seeing a very odd sort of coalition building here? You, Keir Starmer and Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Yeah, and so I just want to pick up on
the UN.
And the UN. What a dinner party. I just want to pick up on something Patrick said, and we all know that I love Patrick, he's a fantastic guy, but I really, really, really worry when we use language like pin-up, or like jihadi bride pin-up around Shamima Begum. She was 15, so she was not a pin-up. She wasn't even an adult. It's a lot of the language around her treats her like she was a sort of independently minded sexual adult who was able to make a marriage. She was 15. She couldn't get married. She was groomed and then trafficked and then raped. This is not somebody, if I went and joined ISIS, I think we can all agree that would be my fault. But fundamentally, she was a child and she did a very adult thing because she was groomed into it. So when we talk about her, let's not talk about her.
It's a question of what you believe, though, isn't it, Rebecca? Right? Well, that is absolutely one side of it. Yeah, fair enough. That is one side of it. I just don't believe that, right? I think a lot of people who hold that view miraculously also want 16-year-olds to have the vote. So she would have just been a few months away from being able to vote. She was a straight A-star student at the time. She's gone over there. She didn't seem to express too much of a negativity about it initially. And then anyone who's ever actually really seriously spent any time and met her, like the bloke who did a documentary on her, who I interviewed just a couple of weeks ago, said, absolutely not. This girl is still the potential to be completely radical, and he thinks that she's just acting. And when I said pin-up, OK, I could have said poster girl, certainly not sexualising her, but what I am saying is that there was a miraculous physical transformation, wasn't there, from the first interviews where she was doing it to the second ones where there was a baseball cap and lippy on.
Is there not a risk, Rebecca, that if we let her back to this country, that essentially we're saying you can go off, join a terrorist organisation, but don't worry, Britain will have you back in our warm arms?
No, I think it's the opposite. I think it's really good to be able to say to people, if you're considering this, look how awful it was, and look how not fun it was, look how not glamorous it is, and look how pointless it is. Look how you get there and you don't achieve anything, you are not achieving some higher spiritual power, and you come crawling back to the country you came from in the first place. That is how you avoid making a martyr of her. Absolutely, when she comes back, she should face trial, 100%, unquestionably. But she was radicalised here, she grew up here, she was a British citizen, and we are responsible for her. We cannot just start getting rid of people because we don't like their behaviour.
Even if they join a jihadi death cult.
Well, in the meantime, it's costing us a lot of money, isn't it? All these legal challenges. Thank you very much, Rebecca Reed, author and broadcaster. Great to have you on the show. And, of course, Patrick Christie's GB News presenter. Great debate. Head to head.
Very good debate. And I do actually appreciate that position from Rebecca there, that this was a girl who you used to see pictures of in sort of, hijabs and burqas and all the rest of it. And now she's wearing low-cut tops and sunglasses and sort of is being more westernised. And maybe
it's totally
that is
cynical. It's totally cynical.
Right, but even if she's lying through her teeth, isn't that a good thing to be projecting?
Well, I'm not sure about that. She managed to get lots of interviews, didn't she, and lots of broadcast attention over in this country, making a bit of a pin-up of her, no?
Yes,
but anyway...
And she is an adult now.
Yes, she is an adult now. Plenty more to bring you on the show. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has been summoned over the lack of defence spending in yesterday's budget. There's not much for defence, and we're constantly told, World War III is coming. But let's get your news headlines.
Emily, thank you. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister refused to say how the government would fund a plan to abolish employee contributions to national insurance. Around £10 billion has been spent on a 2p cut to the insurance rate, but its benefits are likely to be cancelled out by an expected rise in council tax. Rishi Sunak says British workers deserve to be recognised. But the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, says that unlike the government, Labour's policies are fully funded. A boy sentenced for the murder of transgender teen Brianna Ghey is to appeal the decision. Eddie Ratcliffe and Scarlett Jenkinson, who were both 16, were jailed for life last month with a minimum of 20 and 22 years. They were 15 when they hatched a plan to kill Brianna with a hunting knife in an attack that was described as frenzied and ferocious. Brianna's parents say the killers should never be released from prison. A woman who went on the run with her partner and newborn child has denied harming her baby. Constance Martin, who's 36 and comes from a wealthy aristocratic family, is on trial with her partner, 49-year-old Mark Gordon. Their newborn baby, Victoria, died while they were hiding from police in a tent on the South Downs in Sussex in wintry conditions last year. They allegedly went on the run in an attempt to keep the infant after 4 other children were taken into care. Ms Martin denied harming the child, insisting she'd given her the best that any mother would. Both defendants deny wrongdoing. The case is continuing. Christian Horner's accuser has been suspended following Red Bull's investigation into inappropriate behaviour against the Formula One team principal. Mr Horner, who's 50, was allowed to remain in his role after Red Bull's parent company GmbH dismissed the accusations made against him. It's understood the female member of staff has been suspended as a direct result of the inquiry. Nationwide Building Society has reached an agreement to buy Virgin Money in a deal worth £2.9 billion. The planned takeover aims to create a combined lender worth more than £366 billion, making it Britain's second largest. It would eventually see the Virgin Money brand disappear, though Nationwide says it has no plans to cut jobs in the near term. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2748 and €1.1704. The price of gold is £1,694 to 18 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100 is at 7,676 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Tomorrow's going to be a mostly fine day for many of us, but before then, we do have a few showers to watch out for. At the moment, there is a southeasterly flow across the country, and that's being brought on by high pressure towards the northeast of the UK. Worth bearing in mind, this flow is quite brisk and those winds are going to pick up as we go into tomorrow. There will be a few showers this evening across parts of Wales. They will then push into Northern Ireland overnight, and also some showery outbreaks across parts of northeast England and Scotland too. Could be a bit of sleet or snow over the highest ground. Otherwise, a mostly dry night and even some clear skies developing in the south and across parts of northwest Scotland. Clear skies and shelter from the wind in prone rural spots could lead to a touch of frost tomorrow morning. Otherwise, and as we go through tomorrow, apart from a few showery outbreaks of rain through the morning across parts of Scotland and northeast England, it's looking like a dry day, and we will see increasing amounts of sunshine, particularly across many parts of England and Wales and also western Scotland. Meanwhile, areas exposed to that southeasterly wind likely to remain a bit cloudier, and temperatures will be a touch lower than today for many of us, with a wind chill, especially across northern parts. Into the weekend, and it's looking a bit wetter for many of us. There will be some unsettled weather pushing its way in from the southwest as we go through Saturday. So in southern areas, it's likely to turn pretty wet at times over the next few days. A bit more showery further north. Temperatures may pick up on Saturday before dropping down by Monday.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:39. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. We're going to get to some of your views on that Shamima Begum debate. The United Nations getting involved, or at least some of their experts saying the UK should repatriate her and
surprise, surprise.
give her citizenship back. Keep your views coming in. We'll get to them very shortly. But, of course, yesterday's budget offered a little bit of help to small businesses. The Chancellor said it will cut their taxes and help them grow.
But not all have welcomed some of those moves. Some in the industry argue that the budget measures are too small and too late for small businesses.
Well, what does it actually mean on the ground for small business owners who know what they're talking about? Our GB News West Midlands reporter Jack Carson is in Tamworth getting the latest reaction. So, Jack, what does it actually mean for people who run and work in small businesses?
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to find out, Emily and Tom. Here in Tamworth today, we're at Embello, who do printing and merchandising. We're joined with director Carl Raffo. Carl, thanks again for joining us this afternoon. Just kind of reminded then a bit of your reaction about the budget yesterday that Jeremy Hunt delivered at the dispatch box.
Well, I think for small businesses, it was an empty budget. It was certainly one which targeted voters and, from my perspective, really laid that pathway to a general election.
I mean, what kind of impact do you think the budget, because there were some commitments in there, what kind of impact are they going to have on you, do you think?
I think, look, as a small business here in the Midlands, and we manufacture, so we're physically here on the tools, there were some nice little ads, really, whether we look at the benefits of how we can claim against our lease equipment, which we have lots of, but actually my biggest concern is the lack of support to our customers. So working in the hospitality sector, really, there hasn't been enough support there for them, and is that going to have a knock-on effect to us?
Yeah, I suppose that people may want shirts or posters or things printed, so are you worried then that maybe the Chancellor hasn't freed up enough money because, like you say, you're not necessarily a necessity for businesses, you're kind of a bonus?
I think, look, you know, it's all about confidence, and I'm not sure there's enough confidence in business right now, speaking to other business leaders, around what the future looks like for us. So maybe a budget which gave us a little bit more certainty, a little bit more support, and a little bit of a budget which went past the general election would have been lovely.
Yeah, I mean, one maybe criticism was that there was nothing in there specifically about business rates. There had been some calls from the business leaders for a cut in business rate. Is that something that you're disappointed you didn't see?
I mean, look, it's always disappointing when there isn't the support that you want, and I think most businesses would take almost anything they can get right now. So would I like to see it? Absolutely, but it's not there, so we've got to focus on what we have got.
I mean, fuel duty is one of the things that he committed to freezing that 5p reduction. I mean, is that going to have an impact on you? You've got a fleet of cars.
Yeah, I think from us, certainly fuel duty definitely helps. We've got a small fleet, but it literally is every penny counts right now, and I know lots of businesses in a similar space where we are trying to make those small changes to ultimately help our survival in the future.
So is that really how business is? It is literally just kind of making sure every penny is spent wisely, because maybe you haven't got the freedom to go over budget, and you've got to be really strict with yourself at the moment?
Look, you know, I think there's definitely a stronger budget mindset from internal business where we don't want to overspend. We are kind of battening down those hatches just in case. And we hear the R word, that recession word, getting used regularly now. So, you know, there is uncertainty, and we've got to be mindful of that.
All right, Carl, thank you very much for joining us again this afternoon to get that real on-the-ground impact of Jeremy Hunt's budget yesterday.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you very much indeed, Jack Carson, there live from Tamworth with a small business owner. Good stuff.
Now, coming up, one of the killers of Brianna Ghey, one of those killers who was jailed for a minimum of 20 years for her murder, has asked for permission to appeal his sentence. This is Eddie Ratcliffe, the charming-looking fellow on the right on the screen there, who has been, of course, convicted and sent to prison, but now wants to appeal, despite the overwhelming evidence.
Yes, we don't know on what grounds he wishes to appeal and how far this will go, but there he is. He has issued an appeal. He has lodged an appeal against his 20-year sentence. Interestingly, too, and I didn't know this, actually, Eddie Ratcliffe's father has been jailed recently for exposing himself to 2 teenage girls, which is quite something.
Extraordinary. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, one could say. But listening to the verdict, and I was transfixed listening to every word the judge said in this case. The callousness, the joy these 2 teenagers took in murder
And the planning of it.
The planning of it, the meticulous detail, the texts that they sent one another. I am very... I find it very hard to understand on what grounds.
Perhaps it'll be mental health related or something like that. It often is. Often is. Well, we're going to be speaking to a lawyer about this, about what he could possibly, or what grounds he could appeal very shortly. So stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Household energy bills will fall by £238 per year. Good news. An average of £20 a month. That's as Ofgem unveils its new energy price cap. So joining us in the studio is GB News economics and business editor Liam Halligan.
The Ofgem energy price cap, that's the regulated amount that energy suppliers are allowed to charge, will fall from £1,928 a year to £1,690. That's from April the 1st. That's a drop of about 12%. That should save the typical household 20 quid a month. Prices are cheaper than they were, but they're still very elevated by historic standards. Certainly if you're an American household, a French household, even a Spanish or an Italian household, you're paying a lot less for your electricity and your energy in general than you are here in the UK. The energy companies have been a bit tricksy with the government because while they are lowering the energy price cap, and the headlines are, well, your energy bills are coming down, blah, 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 the energy providers have actually chiselled out from Ofgem the permission to charge households an extra £2.33 a month on average. And the energy companies say that is money which they need, the energy companies, in order to support households who have got big debts on their energy bills. I don't know about you, but whenever I talk to people down the pub about energy bills, many of them say, well, the energy company's got like £2,000 of my money and it won't give it back to me. What's going on here? So there are lots of concerns about customer balances with energy companies, and it's also worth saying that as part of this announcement, the bit that no one will notice is that the energy companies are being able to charge all households to try and flatter the energy companies' balance sheets, which to me, on first reading, seems a bit odd.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's coming up to 10 to 2, and major concerns around military spending have been raised to the Defence Secretary after no announcements for his department in yesterday's budget and an assumed large cut, as with all departmental budgets, in the next year.
Yes, Grant Shapps has been summoned to the Commons Defence Select Committee, with the chair, Sir Jeremy Quinn, issuing a statement saying the Defence Secretary has referred to us being in a pre-war state. This does not appear to be reflected in his department's budget allocation. Meanwhile, former Armed Forces Minister Marc Francois added, does Russia have to get to Warsaw before we start spending what we need on defence?
Well, we can speak now with the former British Army officer Hamish de Bretton-Gordon. And Hamish, I suppose on the one hand, very concerning that there are assumed cuts in the defence budget in the next year, in this spending review. But no one really believes these cuts will happen. They're sort of being described as a fiscal fiction, just to fit in with the OBR's spending rules. Do you believe that the government would go ahead and cut our armed forces?
Well, one sometimes wonders whether people in the Westminster bubble
actually listen and watch the news of what's going on, the threats to this country have never been higher, really since 1939, when another tyrant, Hitler, was steaming across Europe. So to have a cut is extraordinary. As you said, Grant Shapps said the other day we're in a pre-war phase. Pre-war, to me, means preparing for war. We've got the smallest army that we've had really for 20 or 30 years. And when some of our allies are looking a bit unreliable, like the Germans, and the possibility that the Americans might change their view on supporting NATO come November. And even today, one of Russia's senior generals has said that he wouldn't be at all surprised if there's war in Europe with the Europeans shortly. So to have a cut in defence, is to me absolutely unbelievable. But not to increase defence. Now, the key thing is that our conventional forces are not a deterrent to Putin. He just doesn't see we can probably put an armoured brigade, which is about 100 tanks, into the field. And when we know the Russians have got thousands and thousands. So, it's extraordinary. I know no political party is leading on this because they don't believe it's a vote winner. But quite frankly, as you said, if the Russians are in Warsaw in 6 months' time, the election is irrelevant. We will be fine. And we need to make sure that we have a conventional deterrent that makes Putin think again. Because I think after yesterday's budget, they'll be drinking vodka in the Kremlin and far happier than the people who are trying to man our defence in this country.
It's all politics, isn't it? As you say that the Chancellor may not see defence spending as a vote winner. Do you think the government is prioritising short-term gains in terms of cutting taxes on ordinary people instead of boosting defence when, as you say, Grant Shapps has said we're on a pre-war footing?
Well, absolutely. And it's not just the Tory party. I think, the Labour Party and everybody else who's trying to win votes this next election is not focusing on defence. And I think generally the people of this country as well don't quite realise what a perilous state that we're in. I know everybody's concerned about the cost of living and climate change and what's happening in the Middle East at the moment, but we need to look a lot closer to home of what's happening in Ukraine, in Europe, on our eastern boundary. And anybody who thinks that Putin will stop if he prevails in Ukraine is completely delusional, because his policy is to push as far west as possible. And it's great that Sweden is joining NATO today, because they really add a stiff back to our defence. But we in Britain, who've traditionally been such a key element to keeping the peace in Europe, the size of our military is, for a country our size and a country, with the wealth that we've have, is extraordinary. And I think the British people, I'm sure, if they really knew the state and things that were happening in Europe and things that are happening in Ukraine at the moment, would back at least a 0.5% or 1% increase, which Ben Wallace, the previous Defence Secretary, has really said is the bare minimum.
But Hamish, when it comes down to it, isn't the problem here that we've got no money? Every department is facing a squeeze. And if we look at the procurement of the MOD, it has not been up to scratch as things stand. We're wasting money within this department with huge overspends and under-delivery. Shouldn't we get the house in order first?
Oh, you're absolutely right. Yeah, defence procurement. There have been some absolutely dreadful examples of wasting money. And in a perfect world, we would get that all in place, get it sorted. But we just don't have the time. It could well be, as I very rarely agree with President Macron, but I do when he says we need to get boots on the ground in Ukraine to hold the Russians there. If we want to make sure that Russia goes no further west than Ukraine, we need to consider putting boots on the ground. And I don't mean in a year or two's time, once we sorted out, some of the vagaries of defence procurement. It could be a lot sooner than that. But at the moment, we are pretty stretched. We might talk a good game, but and we've got, the men and women in the British Armed Forces are the best in the world, sort of pound for pound, but they are very, very small. and we need to wake up to this because, quite frankly, if Russia does progress westwards, which is their want, anything else vexing us at the moment could become horrifically irrelevant.
Hey, Mr. Bretton Gordon, it's a terrifying picture you paint there. Western troops, NATO troops on the ground could drag us all into a huge war. But as you say, that might be coming down the track anyway. Really concerning stuff. Hey, Mr. Bretton Gordon, appreciate your time here on Good Afternoon Britain.
Yes, I guess it takes far more time to sort all the problems within the MOD than to, splash a bit more cash on it. But
say British troops in Ukraine.
No.
To me, I find as a terrifying prospect.
No,
but coming up, we're going to be speaking to a lawyer about those killers of Brianna Ghey appealing their sentence.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Tomorrow's going to be a mostly fine day for many of us, but before then, we do have a few showers to watch out for. At the moment, there is a southeasterly flow across the country. That's being brought on by high pressure towards the northeast of the UK. Worth bearing in mind, this flow is quite brisk and those winds are going to pick up as we go into tomorrow. There will be a few showers this evening across parts of Wales. They will then push into Northern Ireland overnight, and also some showery outbreaks across parts of northeast England and Scotland too. Could be a bit of sleet or snow over the highest ground. Otherwise, a mostly dry night and even some clear skies developing in the south and across parts of northwest Scotland. Clear skies and shelter from the wind in prone rural spots could lead to a touch of frost tomorrow morning. Otherwise, and as we go through tomorrow, apart from a few showery outbreaks of rain through the morning across parts of Scotland and northeast England, it's looking like a dry day, and we will see increasing amounts of sunshine, particularly across many parts of England and Wales and also western Scotland. Meanwhile, areas exposed to that southeasterly wind likely to remain a bit cloudier, and temperatures will be a touch lower than today for many of us, with a wind chill, especially across northern parts. Into the weekend, and it's looking a bit wetter for many of us. There will be some unsettled weather pushing its way in from the southwest as we go through Saturday. So in southern areas, it's likely to turn pretty wet at times over the next few days. A bit more showery further north. Temperatures may pick up on Saturday before dropping down by Monday.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We have a ton of top prizes to be won in our spring giveaway. There's a massive £12,345 in tax-free cash to spend however you like, along with £500 in shopping vouchers for your favourite store, a games console, a pizza oven and a portable Sonos smart speaker. And the best news? You could be our next big winner, just like Phil.
Whoever wins it next is going to be as happy as I was, and they're going to get even more money this time round, so why wouldn't you go in the draw?
For your chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 in tax-free cash, text prize to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if watching or listening on demand. Good luck.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Thursday, the 7th of March.
Yes, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, began yesterday's budget by announcing £1 million of taxpayer funds to be spent on a First and Second World War memorial for Muslims. Could this really counter extremism, like he seemed to imply?
One of the teens who murdered Brianna Jai in a frenzied and ferocious attack is to appeal against his sentence after being jailed for a minimum of 20 years. How could he possibly appeal? We'll speak to a top lawyer. It is a busy show coming up, developing lines on all of these stories. And I am just shocked over this guy, Eddie Ratcliffe.
His murderer.
A murderer. Unusually, for someone under the age of 18, the court made the decision to make his name public, partly so that we could know the details of this horrific attack and spot the warning signs and stop more of this happening. But Emily, you were saying that there's actually more to this guy and more to this guy's family that we should be concerned about.
Yes, and I don't know if this has any relevance to how Eddie Ratcliffe has clearly turned out, but reports are saying that his father has gone to jail, has been sentenced to a jail term for exposure, for exposing himself to teenage girls. So clearly a bit of a wrong in there.
Yeah, it's they seem like a completely messed up family.
But I wonder, in terms of this request to appeal, can they completely throw it out? On what grounds could he be appealing? Very interested to speak to this top lawyer we're going to have on very soon to talk about what he could possibly say in order to have an appeal accepted. Can it be just completely thrown out immediately? And what happens next when this sort of things happen?
And of course, he was the one of the two who had the shorter sentence, the 20-year minimum. He was seen almost as a bit of an accomplice to Scarlett Jenkinson, who was the other murderer. And of course, they meticulously planned out their murder. They spoke over text messages about how they would kill Brianna in an almost gleeful way. A very evil mindset.
Yes, what does this all say about our justice system? But let's get your headlines with Tatiana.
Emily, thank you. The top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister refused to say how the government would fund a plan to abolish employee contributions to national insurance. Around £10 billion has been spent on a 2p cut to the insurance rate, but its benefits are likely to be cancelled out by an expected rise in council tax. Rishi Sunak says British workers deserve to be recognised.
The direction of travel is now crystal clear. Our plans are working because of the improvement in the economic environment, because of the fact we've been able to get inflation down from 11% to 4%, mortgage rates, energy bills falling, wages rising. We've been able to start cutting people's taxes responsibly, and that shows that our plans are working. I believe in a society where hard work is rewarded. We're delivering that for people, and they can see that the change we're talking about is starting to happen. And if we stick to the plan, we can make sure that everyone has peace of mind.
Sir Keir Starmer says that the Tories are giving with one hand and taking with the other. And unlike the government, Labour's policies are fully funded.
Contrast that with the government, where yesterday, at the end of the budget, the Chancellor made a staggering £46 billion unfunded commitment to abolish national insurance. That's bigger than Liz Truss's commitment, so they've learned absolutely nothing. We need change. It's time for change.
A boy sentenced for the murder of transgender teenager Brianna Jai is to appeal the decision. Eddie Ratcliffe and Scarlett Jenkinson, who were both 16, were jailed for life last month with a minimum of 20 and 22 years. They were 15 when they hatched a plan to kill Brianna with a hunting knife in an attack that was described as frenzied and ferocious. Brianna's parents say the killer should never be released from prison. MPs are warning the Post Office is not fit to run any compensation schemes for victims of the Horizon IT scandal and should be excluded. The Business and Trade Committee published recommendations for delivering payments to hundreds of victims, describing efforts so far as abject failure. The committee says an independent body should be appointed to lead the process. The chairman described it as a national disgrace that only £1 out of every £5 of the budget for compensation has been paid out. Christian Horner's accuser has been suspended following Red Bull's investigation into inappropriate behaviour against the Formula One team principal. Mr Horner, who's 50, was allowed to remain in his role after Red Bull's parent company GmbH dismissed the accusations made against him. It's understood the female member of staff has been suspended as a direct result of the inquiry. The government will attempt to overturn amendments to its flagship immigration policy after it suffered heavy defeats in the House of Lords. Commons leader Penny Mordaunt confirmed today that the Safety of Rwanda bill will return to the Lords on the 18th of March. MPs will get a chance to debate and vote on the amendments in the following week. The government's plan would compel judges to regard the East African country as safe, clearing the way to send people who cross the Channel in small boats on a one-way flight to Rwanda. A missile attack killed 3 sailors on a Red Sea merchant ship yesterday, the first fatalities since the Houthis began targeting commercial shipping. The rebel group, who are backed by Iran, claimed responsibility. The Foreign Secretary, Lord David Cameron, says he's appalled by the deaths of the sailors, calling it a reckless and indiscriminate attack. Britain and the United States are continuing retaliatory strikes against the Houthis. In the US, President Joe Biden's preparing to deliver his State of the Union speech later this evening. He's expected to use his 4th address to present a sharp distinction between his style of leadership and his likely opponent, Donald Trump. Touting a strong economic performance, he'll also look to allay voters' concerns about his age, despite being just 4 years older than Mr. Trump. And a new train service between London and central Scotland has been given the go-ahead. The rail regulator approved plans to operate 4 daily return services between London Euston and the city of Stirling. It'll create new competition for LNER, which currently operates services on the route. Grand Union Trains is due to launch its new services by June next year. For the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Well, we heard yesterday in the budget statement that £1 million will be given towards the cost of building a memorial to honour the Muslims who died in the First and Second World Wars.
The Chancellor announced the funding in yesterday's spring budget, saying it was in the service of freedom and democracy.
Yes, it follows the Islamophobia row within the Conservative Party after Tory MP Lee Addison was suspended for suggesting that London Mayor Sadiq Khan was being controlled by Islamists.
Well, the chairman of the National Muslim War Memorial Trust, Mohammed Amin, joins us now. Thank you for joining us. I suppose the idea behind this is to create a sense of perhaps unity amongst different people of different faiths, all of whom fought for Britain.
Good afternoon. Memorials have 2 important functions. One is to honour the dead who fought and died for Britain. But secondly, they also have an important role for the living. This memorial will serve to remind British Muslims how their ancestors fought for the crown and the stake that they have in this country, which was, in one sense, purchased by their ancestors' blood. And it will also inform non-Muslim Britons just what a contribution Muslims have made to the history of our country and defending it in its time of need.
Mohammed, he chose to announce this right at the top of the budget statement in the context of what he calls the tragic loss of life in Israel and Gaza. And he said that this has reminded us of the need to fight extremism, heal divisions, and suggested that this memorial will somehow do that. Do you think that it will?
I do think it will help. I mean, no single thing by itself will solve all of our society's many divisions and problems. But I think Jeremy Hunt is right to recognize that the conflict in Israel and Palestine has affected community relations in this country. He's also right to recognize that British people and British Muslims, everybody in our country, needs to know more about the history of Muslims in the armed forces, as well as recognizing the service that they gave.
There are those who say that religion-specific memorials might in themselves be a divisive measure rather than more unifying memorials that honour everyone. What do you say to those criticisms?
I don't agree with that at all. Each individual chooses what is important in their identity. People who are religious, whether they are Christians, whether they are Jews, whether they are Muslims, for them, their religion is an important part of their identity when they're alive. It's an important part of their identity when they die. That's why it's important to have crosses, have stars of David, have crescents on tombstones, and it's important for the living who remember them.
Mohammed, do you think that there might be anything cynical about this announcement, saying it right at the top of the budget and in the context of lots of accusations of Islamophobia within the Conservative Party? Or do you just take it at face value, this is a nice thing for the Muslim community?
I don't look for cynicism in people unless I have strong evidence for it. So I'm very happy to take this announcement at face value. One thing I should mention for your viewers is that our trust is trying to build a memorial in London. We are a long way away from that sort of being happening yet. But there's another charity called the World Wars Muslim Memorial, which has permission to build a memorial in the National Memorial Arboretum. And my understanding is that this will go towards that particular memorial.
No, that is an interesting point, because there are, of course, some religion or community-specific memorials that already honour some groups in Britain, and I suppose this would add to that roster.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Mohammed Armin. Great to speak to you, Chairman of the National Muslim War Memorial Trust. I think we lost him a little bit at the end there, but we covered off most of the points. What do you think? I think, fine, have a memorial to those who've lost their lives, to Muslims who lost their lives in the world wars, but there is something a bit odd about it leading the budget.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I grew up not far away from a American memorial and there's a Polish memorial near where I grew up as well. I especially in a place like the National Memorial Arboretum, sort of makes sense, and I do sort of get, even if it is cynical, even if it is politics, I kind of get it. Like £1 million is, in the context of a budget spending billions upon billions, hundreds of billions. It's a tiny proportion of the budget, and if it can help Muslims feel more British rather than more separate, and help people come together rather than be ghettoised and siloed and against each other, that could be a good thing.
I just wonder why he started the budget with Israel-Gaza.
Yeah.
And then he goes into the UK economy has been dealt with. It seems like it was sort of plonked in there at the top.
Tacked on at the last minute, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you wouldn't expect it in a budget statement. But anyway, a boy who carried out the sadistic murder of transgender teenager Brianna Ghey wants to appeal against his sentence. Eddie Radcliffe was jailed for life last month in order to serve 20 years before parole for the killing.
Sentencing Judge Mrs Justice Yip said the pair who committed the act would be jailed until they no longer present a danger to the public. But now, of course, this individual is appealing. Joining us to discuss this is the criminal defence lawyer, Nick Freeman. Nick, I'm flabbergasted. I listened to this judgment in full. It was watertight. There was so much evidence. I was astounded by the amount of evidence that was collected and decided upon. On what grounds on earth could this person be looking to appeal on?
Well, possibly two grounds. First of all, he was 15 at the time that he carried out the attack. But possibly more significantly than that, his father has just been jailed, I think, for 15 months for sex-related offences. And I don't remember during the trial that there was any finger of blame being pointed at his father. And it may be because his father hadn't been sentenced, but I don't know whether his lawyers are saying, look, this is fresh evidence. We weren't able to deal with this at the time, or we chose not to, but it's now out in the open. And actually, my father is largely responsible for the perverse, sadistic, disgraceful, disgusting behaviour that I carried out in relation to this poor, because it was obviously transphobic as well. So it may be. It's interesting to note she's not, Jenkinson's not appealing, and he is. So that, to me, is the striking point that a lawyer might try and hang his hat on. It's important to bear in mind what he would like to do is appeal. He needs to get permission from a single judge, a single senior judge in the Court of Appeal Division. It's by no means a certainty that that will be granted. If that's refused, then he can appeal again to a full court, 2 or 3 senior judges sitting in the same division. And if they refuse the appeal, then, and he decides to go ahead with it, then the time that he's spent in custody will no longer apply, will no longer count towards the sentence he's doing. So he'll have to start in effect again. So I think his lawyers will advise him very carefully of the risk. We don't know what the grounds are. I haven't seen the grounds. But at the moment, it's simply for permission, and that seems to be the striking feature where he might try and point a finger of blame at his father. But I don't know what the relationship is between the two of them. But it is interesting to note, and I don't recall anybody saying anything about his father during the mitigation before they were sentenced. Of course, for murder, they have to receive a life sentence. What the judges said is you will serve a minimum of 20 years. Jenkinson will serve 22 years. She seems to be accepting that. And it doesn't mean that will be, all it means is that's the minimum. They may spend, both of them may spend the rest of their life behind bars. That the parole board's got to be completely satisfied they no longer pose a threat to society. And this was such a gruesome, horrific offence that I think the parole board will take some persuading.
That's very interesting indeed. So he does have options, but they're not going to be very easy, and he'll be told of the potential consequences on his custodial time, not least. But the issue of his father being convicted for indecent exposure, I think there's some other convictions too, at least alleged crimes there as well. I guess, and of course we don't know if this is what he's appealing on the grounds of, but I guess whether as a young person he could have been influenced by his father's bad behaviour. He could have been abused himself potentially by his father. I guess these are all hypotheticals, of course, we don't know, but I guess that would be a defence.
Well, it won't be a defence. It certainly wouldn't afford a defence. It would afford mitigation. It would afford an explanation, possibly, that would reduce the sentence. There will have been a full social inquiry report, psychiatric reports, bearing in mind he's on the spectrum of autism. So there will be very extensive inquiries, reports prepared before they're both sentenced. I don't know what the relationship is with Eddie and his father. All we do know is that there is now this conviction and custodial sentence for sex offences. And I anticipate his lawyers are going to be suggesting that there was something untoward in relation to their relationship, and that the father and the way that Eddie's been brought up is to some extent responsible, and they weren't able to put that forward at the time, or they chose not to, but now they want to.
The sadism in this case was more gruesome than anything that I can remember. The discussions that these two teenagers had with one another about how they would kill Brianna Ghey, about what they would feel while they were killing Brianna Ghey, was shocking. I wonder...
Even to the extent that they told him not to get a return ticket. That's how carefully it was planned. It's mind-boggling evil. The careful planning, the sadistic nature, wanting to hear how she screamed, how her face looked as they plunged a knife into her head, her face, and her back 28 times. It's horrendously gruesome. I think the sentence was absolutely right. And as you said, the judge gave a very full account as to why she thought that was the appropriate sentence.
I wonder, in your experience of criminal defence, is it very often that if a family member has been a criminal, if a father has been a criminal, is it more likely that the son or the daughter might be a criminal too?
It can work in all sorts of ways, but what you can say with certainty is if there is some pollutant behaviour by the parents and that influences the child and that in some way is responsible for the child behaving in the way that they have, that will be fully aired at the Crown Court before sentence. And I suspect that wasn't fully aired in these particular proceedings because I don't remember where he was. My recollections, I don't think he was even charged. I don't think the father was charged, was he, at the time? All I know is he received a 15-month custodial sentence since February, since the two murderers were sentenced to life imprisonment. So I think...
Yes, he was jailed 4 days before his son's trial began, so you would have thought it would have come up.
You would. I agree with you. You would. I don't know what extent it's come up, and I'm hypothesizing with you as to what grounds there are. We may be completely wrong. It may be nothing to do with that. It may be, look, the judges got it wrong. I was led. He may say, look, I was led by the girl. My father's nothing to do with it. She was the one who plunged the knife, and et cetera, et cetera. But it was dealt with on the basis of a joint enterprise, and they did blame each other at the time. And I just don't think that I'd be surprised if permission is granted for this appeal to proceed. But we'll wait and see because we just don't know the grounds.
Yeah, we'll wait and see for those grounds and whether or not it is allowed. But my goodness, what a sadistic and evil murder. Nick Freeman, really appreciate your thoughts on this matter. Really, really interesting stuff.
Very interesting indeed. Let us know what you make of that. But coming up, we're talking spuds. Why? Because thousands of gear change, very big gear change, thousands of potatoes lie shrivelled and rotten in muddy fields throughout the UK. Now, this is very important stuff. Could potatoes go missing from the shop floor? More after the break.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Well, to cut a very long story short, I was the chaplain in a school and a pupil asked me to preach on how come they were told they had to accept the LGBT stuff in a Christian school. I thought that was a fair question. So I said, ultimately, no, you don't have to accept anybody else's ideas. You make up your own minds. And so on topics like the marriage being between a man and a woman, biological sex being real, gender identity not making perfect sense, therefore can't be entirely true. I said, you may adopt the church's position on that and respect the people you disagree with, but you make up your own mind. For which, as you say, I was reported to Prevent, the anti-terror watchdog, secular safeguarding authorities, the Teaching Regulation Agency, Disclosure and Barring Service, all of whom eventually cleared me. But I lost my job at the school, and that's why there's legal action ongoing.
It's an incredibly powerful sermon, to be fair. What do you make of Justin Welby in his current role? I've obviously rattled off quite a few things there. I mean, you've had personal experience of feeling quite abandoned. What's your view on his position?
Well, he's doing a very difficult job, in fairness to him. My personal view is perhaps he's not doing the best job of it. I'll be diplomatic about it. In a sense, I'm on the wrong side of things as far as he's concerned, I guess. Not a word of support, not a whisper from anyone in the Church of England's hierarchy for someone simply saying, you may accept the Church of England's own teaching. And I can't quite see how he can square that in his own head, but he would have to answer to that himself, I guess.
I mean, the irony is that, though this is obviously through no fault of your own, the Church of England has recently baptised people who have gone on to not just be referred to Prevent, but actually commit acts of terrorism. Meanwhile, you were referred to Prevent for essentially teaching.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
From 10 a.m. every Saturday, we want to make you think and we want to make you laugh.
So we will give you all the top stories.
Now we start with a story that has shocked the nation this week.
But we're also going to make it light and fun and bring some entertainment in to make your Saturday morning nice and restful.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past 2, and you have been getting in touch with all of these issues, particularly Shamima Begum. John has said Shamima would have been happy as an ISIS bride if they were victorious. So the UN have no right to say the UK should repatriate her and keep her out of it. It's a pertinent point. Is the only reason she wants to come back because ISIS lost?
Yeah, because it suits her now.
Yeah.
It suits her now. It didn't turn out how she thought it might. But this is, of course, the UN getting involved, or UN special rapporteurs getting involved to say that she's a victim and that we should repatriate her.
Their titles. Special rapporteur.
I'd quite like to be called a special rapporteur. Tom says, hi, if she returns, I will leave this country for good. I'm almost at that point anyway. Oh, I don't like hearing that, Tom. I hope you stay. It reminds me of when people say, oh, if Boris Johnson wins the election, I'm going to leave. Bit different, but and then they don't leave.
In fact, quite a few people came to the country, but that's another issue.
That's true. Very true.
Michael says, if the UN believe that Shamima Begum wants to be repatriated, then they must also believe all illegal immigrants in the UK should be too. Even the UN can't have it both ways.
And Yvonne says Shamima should definitely not be allowed back. Can't believe she's still being discussed. Yes, it goes on and on and on, and that's because she keeps appealing. And then you get people from the UN, you know, giving their 2 pence.
Robin says our legal system demands proof beyond a reasonable doubt. With the caliphate destroyed and people dispersed, how do you find witnesses to provide evidence against Begum beyond a reasonable doubt?
Interesting question. And Bill says, regarding the UN, who are these people trying to dictate to others about something that does not concern them? Yes, I must say I have some sympathy with that view.
Hasn't he heard they're special rapporteurs?
Special rapporteurs.
Very special. It's sort of what a parent would say to a misbehaving or to a child that's sort of slightly off. You're very special.
You're very special, Tom.
Very special.
You're very special.
Yeah. Special UN.
Right, well, to potatoes.
Thousands of potatoes are green and mushy on UK store shelves as thousands of spuds lie shrivelled and rotten in muddy fields across the United Kingdom.
A very sad sight. The past 12 months have been a horror story for Britain's poor old potato farmers, with a perfect storm of appalling weather, rain, floods, a catastrophic summer drought, followed by storm after storm after storm.
Not just too much water, also a drought.
I know, not what you want.
Goodness, feast and famine. But let's cross to one affected in Northern Ireland, where we can speak to GB News Northern Ireland reporter Doogie Beattie. And Doogie, how's the farm behind you doing?
Well, you can see the furrows here where the potatoes still are absolutely soaking. I mean, the whole field is drenched. And in fact, I just walked a few feet into it there a moment ago. You can see that lovely potato. Do that on that side. Look at that. it's gone altogether. And that has happened because, as you've said, that we were late in planting crops, and that is a number of reasons for that. Number one on that was the weather. It was very, very wet. But number two on that was high energy costs, and particularly in and around refrigeration. When you're planting crops right about like this, you could be up to £3,000 an acre to plant these fields. And of course, the red diesel that goes in the tractors, we reported this a couple of years ago, that was taken away. That's now, you get that returned in your VAT return, etc. And that means that there's a cash flow problem on farms. So most farms, as they pull crops out, they're then reploughing the fields, getting ready to plant new crops. And every year, of course, your crops are 12 months in advance. But on top of that, we also have a serious amount of cheap imports coming in from all over the world. And if you look at what happened in Pakistan with the flooding there, and of course Ukraine, which is one of the biggest potato manufacturers. So to give you an idea of how much potatoes used to be in Britain, back in the 60s, there was over 300,000 hectares of potato crops across the UK. Last year, there was just about 100,000 hectares. And because most of these crops are now destroyed, you would imagine going to the bank and saying, sorry, we didn't get all our returns out of this crop this year. Can we put it in next year? And by the way, fertiliser prices were so high last year that instead of getting what was in the land, it's now washed out totally, and we are now going to have to spend serious money putting that fertiliser back into the ground. The banks basically are saying, no, that's not going to happen because the same thing may happen again. So you are looking at a very real situation here of farmers right across the UK saying it is not worth our while, but it also brings in food security. Should we be planting more, and should government be doing more to help these farmers feed a nation? Because it is a stable diet of the UK. And if you look at India, they have stopped the exports of onions and rice because they want to feed their own people first. They realise that crops around the world are going down because farming is being really put under the microscope of environmental issues. And you could actually say a lot of these fields are flooded because there was no money given by government to clean out the shucks or drains, as you would call them, because there may have been newts in there that hadn't been in there for years and years. And of course that sends the water table so high that it doesn't get a chance to go away. Then when the storms come, the flooding happens because, of course, the water tables are already extremely high. Now, if you think last year the price of non-contracted potatoes has risen to over £600 a tonne, it's not because they're good potatoes, it's because there's a very big lack of them going into the shops and supermarkets.
Really, really concerning stuff for potato farmers. Dougie Beattie, thank you for bringing us all the very latest there. And I hope you can find some potatoes that aren't rotting in the fields.
No, it's not very good, is it?
Hark back
I like
to
potatoes.
dark times. I love a potato.
I'd be sad if I could no longer get a potato.
Yeah.
Do you think it affects sweet potatoes?
But also, I suppose it does highlight something that is perhaps underappreciated.
Go on.
Food security is also about diversity and diverse supply chains. If our food, when we talk about food security, we're all very often talking about sort of what's known as autarky, sort of self-sufficiency.
Yes, British food for British people.
But actually, if we have a really bad summer or a really bad winter, or in this case, both, it's important to have friends to trade with. It's important that we have our trade deals like we do with Australia and New Zealand. It's important that we sign deals with Canada and the United States of America and our European friends and partners as well. Trade interdependence is also food security.
Absolutely. You want good trade deals with other countries just in case you have absolutely terrible weather. But of course, we do want to help our British farmers too. Not a great thing if you can't sell any of your potatoes. I mean, how many hours graft, how many days graft have gone into those potatoes that are now looking absolutely horrendous and no one will eat? But there you go. Let us know if you had any trouble finding a potato in the supermarket. But coming up, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling has hit back after trans journalist India Willoughby accused her of committing a crime by misgendering her publicly. Stay with us.
Emily, thank you and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister has refused to say how the government would fund a plan to abolish employee contributions to national insurance. Around £10 billion has been spent on a 2p cut to the insurance rate, but its benefits are likely to be cancelled out by an expected rise in council tax. Rishi Sunak says British workers deserve to be recognised, but the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says that unlike the government, Labour's policies are fully funded. A boy convicted of murdering transgender teenager Brianna Ghey is to appeal his sentence. Eddie Ratcliffe and Scarlett Jenkinson, who were both 16, were jailed for life last month with a minimum of 20 and 22 years. They were 15 when they hatched a plan to kill Brianna with a hunting knife in an attack described as frenzied and ferocious. Brianna's parents say the killer should never be released from prison. Christian Horner's accuser has been suspended following Red Bull's investigation into inappropriate behaviour against the Formula One team principal. Mr Horner, who's 50, was allowed to remain in his role after Red Bull's parent company GmbH dismissed the accusations made against him. It's understood the female member of staff has been suspended as a direct result of the inquiry. To the United States, where President Biden is preparing to deliver his State of the Union speech later this evening. He's expected to use his fourth address to present a sharp distinction between his style of leadership and his likely opponent, Donald Trump. Touting a strong economic performance, he'll also look to allay voters' concerns about his age, despite being just 4 years older than Mr Trump. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Tomorrow's going to be a mostly fine day for many of us, but before then, we do have a few showers to watch out for. At the moment, there is a southeasterly flow across the country. That's being brought on by high pressure towards the northeast of the UK. Worth bearing in mind, this flow is quite brisk and those winds are going to pick up as we go into tomorrow. There will be a few showers this evening across parts of Wales. They will then push into Northern Ireland overnight, and also some showery outbreaks across parts of northeast England and Scotland too. Could be a bit of sleet or snow over the highest ground. Otherwise, a mostly dry night and even some clear skies developing in the south and across parts of northwest Scotland. Clear skies and shelter from the wind in prone rural spots could lead to a touch of frost tomorrow morning. Otherwise, and as we go through tomorrow, apart from a few showery outbreaks of rain through the morning across parts of Scotland and northeast England, it's looking like a dry day, and we will see increasing amounts of sunshine, particularly across many parts of England and Wales and also western Scotland. Meanwhile, areas exposed to that southeasterly wind likely to remain a bit cloudier, and temperatures will be a touch lower than today for many of us, with a wind chill, especially across northern parts. Into the weekend, and it's looking a bit wetter for many of us. There will be some unsettled weather pushing its way in from the southwest as we go through Saturday. So in southern areas, it's likely to turn pretty wet at times over the next few days. A bit more showery further north. Temperatures may pick up on Saturday before dropping down by Monday.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now, here's an Easter egg from the budget. It's 37 minutes past 2, by the way. The OBR, the big bogeymen at the OBR, said something really rather strange. That is, that one of the tax cuts the Chancellor announced, far from losing revenue for the government, it will actually raise revenue for the government. Here to tell us all about it is our GB News economics and business editor, Liam Halligan. Liam, what on earth's going on?
So what's going on, Tom, is that the OBR and the Treasury, they've acknowledged the existence of something called, get ready, drum roll, the Laffer curve. What is the Laffer curve? The Laffer curve is an economic concept invented by a US economist called Arthur Laffer. He was big in the sort of Reagan era in the 80s and 90s, and Arthur Laffer came up with the striking but very simple idea that some taxes, if you lower the tax rate, that means more people pay the tax because you change behaviour and tax revenue goes up. The Laffer curve is usually thought of in the other direction. If you raise tax rates, then people do less work and work very hard to avoid taxes, so you actually get less tax revenue. And the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, has resisted the idea of the Laffer curve for quite a long time. You know, people like Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, people on the right of the Conservative Party, John Redwood, also former cabinet minister, have often said if you lower taxes, you get the economy moving, and that means you raise more revenue. The OBR has resisted that idea. But in this one instance, and Jeremy Hunt referred to this in his speech yesterday, didn't he, that the OBR have found their inner Laffer curve. In this one instance, the OBR have acknowledged the Chancellor's argument as being correct. Because what the Chancellor did yesterday, it was little noticed, but quite an ideologically striking move. He lowered capital gains tax from 28 to 24% on houses that are sold under certain circumstances. There are some complications that aren't your residential property. Look, if you sell the house that you live in with your family and you've lived in it for more than 3 years, then you don't pay capital gains tax. That's a fundamental principle of living in the UK. You don't pay capital gains tax on your principal residence. I don't think that any party would have the guts to touch that fundamental principle of life here in Britain. But if you sell a house that you rent out, a buy-to-let or so on, then you really do pay capital gains on it, and it can be quite high, particularly if you're a higher rate taxpayer. But what Jeremy Hunt is saying, in certain circumstances, capital gains tax on non-residential housing or houses in which you don't reside, someone else resides in them but you own them, that's going to come down from 28% to 24%, quite a chunky reduction. And Liam, the OBR unusually has admitted that will raise more revenue.
I suppose there are lots
breakthrough.
of people in this country that might have bought a house in the 1990s for tuppence halfpenny, perhaps just the quid they found back down the back of the sofa, as house prices used to cost, and suddenly they've realised that this house is now worth hundreds of thousands of pounds more than when they bought it, and so won't sell it because they'd be on the hook for potentially 100,000 plus of tax, maybe even more than that of tax.
You're exactly right.
The thing up.
What the Chancellor's trying to do here, and I fully, it's not my job to endorse the policies of one party or another, but I completely understand his logic here, and I actually think the logic is compelling, let me put it like that. He's trying to unlock housing for people who can buy the housing in order to make it their principal residence. And there are quite a lot of people, Tom, in my generation and the older generation, rather than, with respect, your and Emily's generation, if I may say so.
My avocado-eating generation.
There are quite a lot of people who, over the years, have moved from one house to another, but they've kept the house that they're moving out of as a sort of nest egg, as a pension. You know, we have lots of accidental landlords in this country, don't we? People with, say, one buy-to-lets, rather than being a sort of big corporate rental company. And if you lower the punishment when you sell that house, if you lower the tax on the gain, that has accrued in that house, then you may encourage people to sell those houses and release them back onto the market so, frankly, younger families can buy them. I'm not sure it will work, but the OBR certainly has accepted the argument that it might work. And the idea that you can lower a tax rate and get more tax revenue from the same tax at a lower rate is a revolutionary idea, it's a powerful idea, and it's an idea, Tom and Emily, that is borne out by the evidence. You know, when the UK lowered corporation tax to all the way down to 19% from the high 20% from 2010 down to 2022, tax revenue from corporation tax as a share of GDP rose quite significantly. I believe in the Laffer curve. As a professional economist, I've studied it for many years. Whitehall generally doesn't believe in the Laffer curve. But this tax, and it's well spotted by you, this tax, the fact that there may be a Laffer curve with this treatment of capital gains tax is a major change in the thinking of Whitehall. It may be just a limited example of a shift in thinking, but it's better than nothing.
Well, maybe stamp duty next. on the chopping block. Let's see. Thank you very much, Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor, of course.
Well, after the break, we'll be speaking to a discrimination lawyer as J.K. Rowling is reported to the police for an alleged hate crime for misgendering a transgender journalist. More on that after this.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
For decades, Britain has been dealing with immigration, but for one part of the UK, it is a relatively new experience. GB News' Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie has this report.
At the end of April 2023, Ireland's immigration was up by 31%. And over a decade, Northern Ireland's has doubled, with South Belfast being the most diverse. Tracy Kelly is a DUP Belfast City Councillor who deals with the issues in this area on a daily basis.
We have working class communities like Sandy Row, like the Donegal Pass, who are blending in with others who are coming here to work and live and mix. But there is also an issue when there's too many people who can't get housed. That seems to be the main issue that I deal with. When people in their own community who've been born and reared here have to move away because there's a lack of housing.
Takura Makoni represents the African community of Northern Ireland.
I would presume mostly 99% of asylum seekers or migrants and refugees coming to this part of the world would have very little knowledge about the internal dynamics in Northern Ireland. So you find out it's almost like you're thrown in the deep water. To have the cognizance to say, here, I need to pick up that I'm living on a peace line and these guys don't like those guys and maybe these guys can tolerate me and those ones won't. You don't have any idea of that. It'll take you up to 10 years to get a real sense of that because, remember, you're focused on trying to rebuild your life.
To avoid further tensions, should government be looking at the placement of those refugees and migrants?
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
It's 2:47. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, the trans journalist India Willoughby has reported author J.K. Rowling to the police, or she says she has anyway, for an alleged hate crime for misgendering in online posts.
Well, J.K. Rowling refused to refer to Willoughby as a woman when engaging in an online debate about all-female locker rooms. But the Harry Potter author has responded, claiming that Willoughby's obsessive targeting of her, in her view, may meet the legal threshold for harassment.
Well, joining us now to discuss the legal boundaries of this row is discrimination lawyer Robin Moira White. Robin, thank you very much for joining us. It's getting rather heated on the Twitter sphere between J.K. Rowling and India Willoughby. India has, for a long time, not appreciated J.K. Rowling's interventions in the whole transgender debate and issue. And now India Willoughby claiming that she's reported J.K. Rowling to the police for misgendering. I mean, could that be a crime?
Well, it could be part of a crime. I mean, there are a whole series of in the workplace or in service provision locations, the Equality Act applies. We're quite protective of free speech, though, in the UK, and there are a number of acts, relevant acts, the Communications Act, the Online Safety Protection Act, and potentially the Harassment Act from 1998. But in all cases, it requires really quite serious conduct to go across the line. And I'm not sure anything. I have been following the frankly unattractive exchanges on social media, and I don't think I've seen anything yet that goes across the line. Some of it's got quite close to it, and police forces are quite used to reports on occasion, I think, from people who are concerned, so that they're ready if people go that step further.
So what would be the line to cross? Because as you're right, this country does, nominally at least, support free speech. You should be allowed to be rude to someone else. I suppose harassment is a line about repeated, targeted. What's the legal boundary?
Yeah, well, in the Harassment Act requires a course of conduct. So it's more than one action. And the definition in the Harassment Act is a bit circular. It's harassment if a reasonable person would think it's harassment. So that sort of leaves it to the court. The other acts are quite carefully written. So the Communications Act, for example, for which there was, I think we've seen matters related to Harry Miller and Kate Scottow in the past, and that requires an intent to cause harm with a communication that's directed at someone. So from personal,
but this online the Communications Act, as far as I understand it, is the act that meant that someone who wrote a tweet that joked about British soldiers, or was it Sir Captain Tom Moore, ended up with some sort of sentence. There are people who sent WhatsApps making jokes about Grenfell who were prosecuted under this act. To some extent, it can be.
Wasn't there a dog that did a Nazi salute as well, and that got
that got into all sorts of. It was a pug. All sorts of legal trouble. So I suppose there are. This country isn't totally free speech,
I mean,
sadly.
There's a level. I mean, the Communications Act requires. I'm paraphrasing, but it requires something that's grossly offensive. So virtually any comparison of someone to a Nazi would be across that line, for example. Because of how people react to that. Virtually anything that called someone who wasn't a paedophile or a child abuser would be grossly offensive.
It's a difficult one, though, isn't it, Robin? Because J.K. Rowling is very much accusing India Willoughby of harassing her over a number of years, writing nasty things, going after her, targeting her over the course of many years, so she says. She says that lawyers advised her that not only did I have a clear winnable case against India Willoughby when it came to defamation, but that India's obsessive targeting of me over the past few years may meet the legal threshold for harassment. So they both believe they may have a legal case against one another. But is it not very, very important to note that also gender-critical views, i.e. the belief that, transgender women aren't women and so on, is also protected under equality law?
Well, the belief has an absolute protection. Manifestation of belief has a protection with limitations. So the case that everybody would be familiar with, the Forstater case in the EAT that established protection for gender-critical people, judge in that case said very clearly that what this wasn't was a license for people to go around misgendering people in workplaces, because if you do that to a work colleague, that's very likely to be unlawful harassment, unless it's done as a mistake or whatever. So there are balances and boundaries to be had between rights that mean all people should be able to live in comfort and peace, particularly in something like a workplace or a shop or a service delivery location.
No, really interesting stuff there. Robin Moira White, thank you very much for your expertise on this matter. Discrimination lawyer, of course. Emily, what do you make of that?
It's difficult. I mean, it doesn't really make an awful lot of sense, the equality laws around this, because if your belief is protected that you don't believe a man can become a woman, if that's protected in law, but then it's against the law to misgender someone in what could be considered an offensive manner, then those two surely contradict one another.
Well,
if you strongly have a held belief, you have to then pretend that you don't in order to get around the harassment laws and all of that.
I think that might have been more referring to sort of employment tribunals and the rest of it. If you sort of pointedly shouting pronouns at someone, that might be considered to be...
I don't know, India Willoughby thinks she's got a case.
Yeah, it's true.
Against
It'll be
J.K. Rowling.
fascinating to follow, but we've run out of time.
We don't have free speech, really, do we?
No, we
Nominally.
don't. No.
Nominally.
If you can be arrested for a tweet, we don't have free speech. Let's cross across to Martin Daubney. What's on your show?
OK, the morning after the night before, Christopher Hope, our political editor, sits down with Jeremy Hunt and asks him, was it the right thing to do to propose a £1 million Muslim war memorial, plus immigration baked into your budget? Plus, we'll have Dame Andrea Jenkins on the budget we should have had. And great news, as GB News helps to house a homeless woman in Jeremy Hunt's constituency. That's all coming up after your latest weather forecast.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Tomorrow's going to be a mostly fine day for many of us, but before then, we do have a few showers to watch out for. At the moment, there is a southeasterly flow across the country. That's being brought on by high pressure towards the northeast of the UK. Worth bearing in mind, this flow is quite brisk and those winds are going to pick up as we go into tomorrow. There will be a few showers this evening across parts of Wales. They will then push into Northern Ireland overnight, and also some showery outbreaks across parts of northeast England and Scotland too. Could be a bit of sleet or snow over the highest ground. Otherwise, a mostly dry night and even some clear skies developing in the south and across parts of northwest Scotland. Clear skies and shelter from the wind in prone rural spots could lead to a touch of frost tomorrow morning. Otherwise, and as we go through tomorrow, apart from a few showery outbreaks of rain through the morning across parts of Scotland and northeast England, it's looking like a dry day, and we will see increasing amounts of sunshine, particularly across many parts of England and Wales and also western Scotland. Meanwhile, areas exposed to that southeasterly wind likely to remain a bit cloudier, and temperatures will be a touch lower than today for many of us, with a wind chill, especially across northern parts. Into the weekend, and it's looking a bit wetter for many of us. There will be some unsettled weather pushing its way in from the southwest as we go through Saturday. So in southern areas, it's likely to turn pretty wet at times over the next few days. A bit more showery further north. Temperatures may pick up on Saturday before dropping down by Monday.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're springing into spring and giving you the chance to win the seasonal essentials. First, there's an incredible £12,345 in tax-free cash to be won, plus a spring shopping spree with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in the store of your choice. And finally, a garden gadget package to enjoy, including a handheld games console, a portable smart speaker and a pizza oven. For your chance to win the vouchers, the treats and £12,345 £45 in tax-free cash, text GBWIN to 84902. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB03 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on Friday the 29th of March. Full terms and privacy notice at